It was around the time when I started working in the subway outlet as a cashier. Before I got this job, I had heard many things about the outlet, many horrifying incidents that had happened there reported by people who lived there. It was not like I did not believe them. Instead, I was the one who believed in these horrifying incidents more than others and was terrified about them. But due to the terrible financial conditions of my family, I'd had to accept this job because it was the only job who was offering a handsome amount. The first day on the job, I was terrified as hell, imagining many possible horrors that I could have encountered. When I reached the outlet, the first person I encountered was the old man who was the owner of the place. He looked around his 60s and was pretty weak for his age. The man welcomed me humbly and told me about the outlet and how things worked around there. As he was explaining to me about everything, it was hard not to notice him fumbling in every sentence. After explaining, he gave me the keys, saying that I would be the one opening and closing the outlet every day as well. He never gave me the option of rejecting it and leaving. There was not any customer at the moment, so I looked around the outlet before starting the work. It looked quite old but clean, so after looking around for a while, I started my work. I noticed there were not many people who came to the outlet, and the old man did not come by very often as well. So I continued working there, and even after a week when I did not witness any paranormal activity, I felt a bit relieved thinking it must just be rumors created by people. But still, deep down, I was terrified that it might be true as well. One night when I was about to close the outlet, I heard footsteps coming from the employee bathroom. Thinking it must be a customer, I said in a loud voice, "Customer, can you hurry up? I'm about to close the outlet." As I said that, the noises stopped all of a sudden, and I did not think much about it at the time and continued cleaning up. But when no one exited the bathroom for a while, I started to feel scared, thinking that it could be a ghost or something. But then a few minutes later, the old man came out, and I let out a sigh of relief that was not what I was thinking. I called out to him, but he ignored me and continued walking to the kitchen. Even after me calling for him multiple times, when he did not respond, I figured he could not hear me. I followed him to the kitchen and noticed that it looked like a hospital room instead of the kitchen, but I could clearly remember that it looked nothing like this because I had been here multiple times. The old man also started to look a lot younger than his age, and that was when I noticed him walking toward a bed where a patient was lying. His eyes were wrapped with a blindfold, and his hands and legs were tied to the bed with chains. The old man took out surgical knives and other surgical equipment and started to perform surgery. But when he started to remove the man's organs one by one and then left him dead, I figured out what was going on around over there. Then all of a sudden, the old man performing surgery disappeared and the room went dark. The man who was lying on the bed and was dead opened his eyes and looked at me. And that was when some more people wearing patient clothes appeared. Each one of them had something in common. They all were missing parts of their body, and one of them had no eyes. He came closer to my face and said, "Leave this place." And then they all started to chant the same thing. At this point, I had been terrified as hell and started to pee in my pants. I was so scared that it did not even bother me because I was feeling as if my heart was going to burst with the terror and horror that I was witnessing. I ran outside while stumbling and falling on my way out. It was hard to gather the strength and the courage to stand up and leave the place, but I still managed to exit the outlet somehow without closing it. Even though I was terrified as hell, I decided to tell the old man who was the owner of the place about leaving and calling on his phone. Surprisingly, the number was not connecting, even after trying multiple times. So I went to his address and rang the bell of his house. I was trembling throughout the entire process, but instead of the old man, a guy in his 20s came out. I told him that the old man hired me for the subway outlet and I was quitting. The guy looked at me with a weird look that I could understand because I had the same look last night. It was the look of getting scared to his pants. he replied in a trembling voice. It's not possible. My father died 15 years ago in a fire, and even though he owned the hospital building, the outlet's not owned by us. I froze at the place, horror-struck, staring at him with frightening eyes. It was not just him shaking like a leaf, but me as well. Somehow, I managed to move from the place and walk towards my apartment. The scene from the day I got the job to the last night played continuously in my head. After coming to my apartment, I slowly and quietly started trembling with fear, packed my stuff, and decided to leave the place. As I was standing at the bus stop waiting for the bus, an old man looked at me with pitiful eyes while asking me the reason for leaving the place. He turned out to be one of the oldest citizens of the town and told me the story of the place. That outlet was built over one of the oldest buildings around the town, and many said that the building used to be a hospital where multiple illegal experiments were performed on the patients. The doctor was mentally ill, but no one knew about it. He used to perform weird surgeries on patients who were either orphan or had no one to look after them. And before the building became completely abandoned, there was a huge fire, and the doctor who performed the surgery along with the patients was burnt to his death. As he finished his story, I noticed my bus coming in my direction. I turned my head to thank him and noticed that there was no one around me.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
The girl I fell for. I was born into a poor family. Well, my family was not always in that state. In fact, my father used to be one of the richest men in town before I was born. But due to a bad investment, he went bankrupt and started to fight with my mother. She was pregnant with me at the time and got divorced as soon as she gave birth to me. She got remarried soon after that, leaving me in my father's care. As I was growing up, I never got my mother's love or my father's. Hell, I didn't even receive a proper education. My father started drinking and gambling with all the money we had left. When I turned 15, he kicked me out, saying that he did not have money or resources to take responsibility. I went to my mother after that, but she also turned me down, saying that her new family would not allow her. And apart from that, I reminded her too much of my abusive father. I was homeless for days, but then I started working for small petty jobs to earn some money for my survival. And after a few months, I saved enough money and rented a small one-bedroom apartment. I got a job at a department store as a cashier and started working there. It was going well and everything. I managed to keep my job for about 2 years or so, but then one day the owner died, and his son, who was the new owner, fired me to hire a girl instead. After getting fired from my old job, I started hunting for new ones, but I couldn't find any, and due date of rent was also almost over my head. I did not have enough friends, except for Marcus, whom I met while I was doing a part-time job. He told me about this new sauna bathhouse that had opened a few months ago and said that they were hiring. So I went there, asked for any openings. They asked me several questions, but I was not suitable for most of the vacant positions because I was not qualified enough for them. So they gave me the position of janitor. I did not have any issues with that, so I accepted the offer. The pay was also higher than my last job. That day was Friday, and they told me to report on Monday. I went home, and when I reached there, the owner was there for rent. I told him about my condition and also that I got a new job, and that I would pay him as soon as I get the money. He was a nice guy. He knew that I was a homeless orphan before coming here. In fact, he was the one who helped me with getting my last job, so paying rent was never a problem. But still, I always wanted to pay up on time, out of respect for myself. And he knew that about me. He told me that I could get some time for paying the rent, and he didn't mind at all. After saying that, he gave me the side dishes he brought for me, which he often used to do. Apparently, he did not have any children of his own, so he used to call me son, and his wife used to send me side dishes for me. It didn't have the heart to deny his generosity, so I always accepted them. I spent the weekend relaxing and resting in my apartment, which felt very boring to me. And on Monday morning, I woke up early, took a shower, and got ready and headed towards work. When I reached there, a lady explained my work to me. I started my work right after that. It was mostly cleaning, etc. As I was working near a sauna room, I saw a gorgeous girl who had just been in her late 20s, and she was instructing a customer on something. She saw me staring at her and passed me a smile. I felt embarrassed that I was caught and continued to focus on my work. "So you're the new janitor, huh?" I heard someone's sweet voice and turned to see that it was her. I nodded my head yes, and apologized for staring at her. "Oh, don't worry about that. I do not care for some stares. In fact, it felt good. By the way, my name is Jade. I work here as a bathing facilitator," she said while laughing. "Hi, I'm Rob," I said in a hushed tone. "Okay, Rob. I'll see you around then." She left after saying that, and while leaving me speechless and mesmerized by her beauty. After that day, Jade and I would often have small talk while working. Things were going just fine until one day when she asked me if I wanted to hang out after work. Well, you may have figured out that by now, I started to have a crush on Jade, so I agreed. She took me to a bar, and we enjoyed ourselves the entire night. It was around 2 a.m. or so when she told me that she forgot her purse at the sauna bath place, so we went back to pick up her purse. But when we reached there, it was unlocked. She said that the owner must be there or something and asked me to wait outside while she would quickly grab her purse and come back. I waited there for around 30 minutes or so, but when she didn't come back, I went inside looking for her. She wasn't around the reception area, so I looked around only to see that she was sitting on the ground, frozen. There was a stick-looking like thing right in front of her, which was covered in blood, and her clothes were all torn up. I looked in the other direction, and a man's body was laying there, covered in blood. His left eye and chest looked like they got stabbed multiple times. Again, I looked towards Jade, and the stick in her hand looked like a hair accessory to me. I understood the situation, and I went towards her and covered her with my jacket while telling her that everything would be alright. She looked at me with a painful look in her eyes and started weeping. I told her that we should get rid of the body and asked her if there was any surveillance cameras installed there. She told me that there wasn't any, and I felt a bit relieved. She said to me that there was a big fireplace installed in one of the sauna rooms which was rarely occupied, so we took the body over there, started the fire, and threw it in. We waited there to make sure that the body was completely incinerated, and I cleaned up the place nicely, so the smell of blood would not linger there anymore. We left the place and after that went to our homes. I could not stop thinking about it because I had no idea who that person was. Was it the owner of the place or someone else? We decided to never talk about it ever again. I hope that no one finds out about this, and luckily, no one has come to ask about anyone yet. I'm still working there, and still don't know who that man was, but I don't even want to know about it.
Beating the high score. Hey man, good to see you. How are you doing these days? Who's Mason, the guy I'd been friends with since elementary school. Ah, good to see you too. I'm good, bro. How about you? I replied. It was a typical normal greeting among each other after meeting for so long. It's not like we're not friends anymore, but it's more like we've gone from being best friends to being kind of friends. We'll only greet each other when they run into one another. So, about me and Mason, the reason we're like this is because of an incident that took place in middle school which scared us so much that whenever we run into each other, all the memories of the past come flooding in our minds. We have made a promise to each other that the day we overcome our trauma, we would start hanging out again, no matter how long it takes. We were in middle school, and it was right after the summer vacation ended that year when Mario Kart Wii was released and was trending like crazy. Now, none of us had the console to play the game in. It was just me and Mason who were best friends, but there were a total of 5 kids. Me, Mason, Theo, and Owen. The 4 of us had been friends forever. It was more like our parents were friends, and that's how we met in elementary school. We were inseparable and loved each other wholeheartedly. Anyway, we planned to ask our parents to buy us a console, and we'd keep asking until they would buy it. But the plan went down the drain, since none of them agreed to buy the console for us. So we decided to find a gaming cafe where we would be able to play the game within our budget. One day Mason, Owen, and I were strolling after school and waiting for Theo to join us after he was done cleaning up the classroom, which by the way was his punishment for skipping class. Mason, you and Theo are in the same class, right? So how did he end up getting caught? I asked. It was some stupid kid. Who told on him to the teacher? Mason replied while kicking a pebble. Even though the four of us were friends, Mason was closer to Theo than the rest of us, and it was because they lived next door to each other. While Owen and I shared something similar as well since we were cousins, we waited almost half an hour until we saw Theo run in our direction, which made our faces light up. Theo had this aura to always keep up the environment with his weird and stupid jokes and his sense of humor. I'm telling you guys, they save money by making students clean in the name of punishment. The moment he caught up to us, he said while panting, I guess he ran from the school. Here, drink some and catch your breath for a few minutes, Owen said while passing the water bottle to Theo. Thanks, man. So, where are we heading to? Theo said while grabbing the bottle from Owen's hand. We'll just keep walking until we find the gaming cafe, I said. We continued our stroll after Theo stopped panting, and as we were walking, we spotted an old-looking cafe. There was a Nintendo sign drawn on the board, so we walked in to check it out. Our eyes went wider as we saw where all kinds of Mario games were, so we went ahead to the counter to ask for the price. And it was within our budget. The price was so low, and they charged hourly, so we decided to start paying for the Mario Kart Wii. The Mario Kart Wii setup was in the left row, so we went there and each of us took a seat. We noticed that there wasn't anyone else around the cafe except for a weird looking kid who was also playing Mario Kart Wii while dressed up as Mario. We ignored the kid and started playing the game. Now that we were playing it, it was so much fun. The gaming cafe was different. There was already a high score with the same name on each of our screens, and it looked quite unbeatable. Hey guys, how about we make a bet? Owen asked all of us all of a sudden as we were playing the game. We're listening, the rest of us said in a synchronized voice. Whichever of us beats the high score on the screen will get a pizza treat from the rest of us, he said while focusing on the game. And you think you're the one who's going to win, right? Theo said with a sarcastic tone. No, I don't think just that. I know that I will be the winner. Owen turned his head over towards him and said very confidently with a smile, Deal. We said it in sync again. After playing for 2 hours, we decided to head home, so we exited the cafe. We noticed the weird kid with Mario's costume was still there playing. From that day onwards, we started coming to the gaming cafe every single day after school to play Mario Kart. It was the 7th day of the week, and we were close to beating the high score, but for some reason, we were not able to do that. We continued playing for a little bit longer, hoping to beat the score on the screen. In your face, Owen. Look, I made a new high score. It was Theo, whom all of a sudden screamed with excitement. He looked at our screens, and it was him who was the top scorer on the screen. It was the first time I noticed the weird kid turning his head in our direction. I guess he must be the one who had the high score that Theo just beat. As promised, we went to his favorite pizza place and contributed into buying him the pizza that he wanted to eat. After that, we ended up having more fun than we imagined and then headed over to our homes. Another bet was made by Theo. Well, it was more like a challenge than any of us had to beat his high score. We could not beat that high score for the next 2 days. And on the third day, Theo did not show up to the cafe. And the high score on the screen was different. It was the weird kid again who had the high score on the screen. We did not pay much attention to it and continued playing the game. The next day, Mason told us that Theo had an argument with his parents and ran away from home. He'd been missing ever since. You know, it's weird. He did not come to any of our houses to stay the night, I said. We all agreed because it was unlike him to do so. He used to have arguments, and whenever he did, he'd always end up spending the night at either one of our houses. And then after that, he'd go home on his own and make up with his parents. So we were a bit worried about him this time. We did not go to the gaming cafe the next few days because there was still no word from Theo. His parents filed a missing person report, and we also helped look around the area for him. But he was nowhere to be found. We assumed that he may have gone to his uncle's house, which sometimes he used to, and since Theo's parents and his uncles were not on good terms, they may have not have called back asking about Theo. After 4 days, we went to the gaming cafe again and decided to beat the high score before Theo comes back, just so that this time it would be one of us bragging about the high score and then getting some pizza. It was Owen this time who beat the weird kid's score, and then managed to get a new high score on the screen. But since Theo wasn't there, he didn't seem too happy about it. He said he would get his pizza after Theo comes back and then just headed home right away. The next day, Owen did not show up to school either. So we got worried about him and went to his home to ask around. His parents told us that he never got back that day, and that they were thinking that he was with one of us. When we told them that Owen left on his own that day, they started getting worried. We searched every possible place that we could think of, but we couldn't find him either. It was exactly like when Theo went missing. That was when it clicked that they both went missing after being the high score of that weird kid. So we went there to confront him, and instead of denying it, he looked at us with a wicked smile on his face and said, "You guessed right. You should stop coming here as well, or you will end up dying just like your friends." The way he said that was so terrifying that we immediately ran from there. We decided to tell the cops about this, and when we went there with the officers, the weirdest thing happened, which made them think that we were messing around with the officers. There was no gaming cafe there. Instead, there was just an abandoned building with a broken Nintendo sign on it. This incident happened to me 3 days ago when my flight landed in Michigan around 2:35 a.m. I came from North Carolina for an urgent business meeting. I opened the Uber app and started looking for a ride, and the nearest available driver was about 10 minutes away. So I booked the ride and started waiting for the cab. As those 10 minutes passed, I tried opening the app to check how much longer, but for some unknown reason, the app crashed and it just wouldn't open. That was when a black Toyota Corolla came and stopped in front of me. There was an Uber sign on that, and I remembered the license number, so I checked and it looked the same. I hesitated a bit before going in because the app still wasn't opening. Then I got in because it was already getting late. After getting in, I announced the destination to the driver once more, even though I'd already put that on the app. But still, you never know since the app wasn't working. He did not say anything or turn back. Instead, he just nodded and started the car. For some reason, it was unusually dark inside the car, and it was hard to see in front of the mirror as well. A long silence, a dark and creepy environment from the car, and the time all felt weird and horrifying to me. To keep my mind off these weird, scary thoughts, I took up my phone and started to scroll through Instagram. Then again, crashed as well, and my phone turned off all of a sudden. I tried turning it back on, but even after multiple attempts, it did not. Now this had gotten scarier than ever, even before I started scrolling Instagram. I mean, how many chances are there that all of these could be coincidences? First, my Uber app crashed just before booking the ride. Second, the driver doesn't talk, or he doesn't even turn his head back. Not even a single time. Third, the unusually dark and silent environment of the car. And lastly, as soon as I opened my Instagram to kill some time, not only did the Instagram app crash, but now my phone isn't even turning on. And at this point, if something were to happen to me, I wouldn't even be able to call anyone for help, because my phone is dead. All these thoughts were coming up in my mind, and that was when the Uber killer case that happened in Michigan suddenly came across my mind, and my train of thought suddenly started at a race at full speed. For those of you who don't know about this case, it was about a 45-year-old Uber driver who one night went on a rampage and killed 6 people. But I know if I were to get killed by this Uber driver, my case would be completely different. As I was thinking all this, I realized that it's been more than half an hour since I got in the car, and I still hadn't arrived at the destination. I looked outside the car and there was nothing there. No buildings, no vehicle, nothing. I could not understand what route he was taking. But what if he was really going to kill me? What if what I've been thinking till now was correct? Maybe he was taking the correct route, but since I haven't been here much, I don't know how things work around here. Try to convince myself and shake my thoughts to only think positively. But no matter how hard I tried, all I could think about was all the cases that happened in the past related to the cab drivers killing and harassing passengers. During this entire time, I continued looking at my watch to check the time, and every single minute felt heavy on my scared mind. I did not know how long till I died, and I kept wishing all of it to just be my imagination and nothing else. Once again, I looked at my watch to check what time it was, and 45 minutes had passed since I got in the cab. I hesitantly opened my mouth just to ask how much longer it would take for us to reach my destination. But then I closed it without asking. It was because I thought, what if I provoked them by asking any questions and speed up my killing process? I was feeling terrified and uneasy throughout the entire ride and kept trying to turn on my phone, which by the way was still no luck. After multiple discussions and arguments with myself, I finally decided to ask the driver about the remaining distance from the hotel, but he still did not respond. That was when he stopped the car. All of a sudden, I looked over to my left, and it was the hotel. I hurriedly opened the gate and exited the car. Guess I was thinking wrong about the driver all this time. So I leaned a bit to thank the driver, but to my surprise, there was no one in the driving seat. I stepped back from the car, and that was when my phone's notification bell rang. I checked it with trembling hands, and it said, "Your ride has been canceled due to your unavailability at the pickup location." As I read this, I hesitantly and slowly looked at the cab, but to my surprise, it wasn't there anymore. I looked at the hotel and I was really there. I looked up the app just to see the license plate number because I was sure I checked it when I booked the ride. And after checking it, I noticed that there was a digit difference in both of them. My entire body was trembling and shaking with fear, so I picked up my bag and rushed inside the hotel. Today's the last day of my visit here, and I'm supposed to fly back tonight. But I've learned my lesson. There's no way I'm going to the airport at night. I checked the time and it was 7 p.m. Well, my flight was at 11:50, but I still checked out of the hotel, called a taxi for the airport, and headed out hoping that this time I don't experience such an event.
I don't understand, James. I'm worried about our son. He was just fine the day when we went there. Don't worry, honey. I think he's feeling unwell. That's why he's so quiet. Give it some time, and he will get back to normal. James replied in a calm tone after hearing my concern about Austin. I hope so, I said while taking a long sigh. My name is Martha Geller. I got married to the love of my life, James, at the age of 21. But even after 15 years of our marriage, I was unable to conceive. We tried everything and spent our entire life savings to get pregnant, but were unable to. After years of suffering and prayers, God finally blessed us with a son like Austin. He was our only child, and we loved him very much. But the problem was that for trying to get pregnant, we were not able to save a single penny to raise our child. Both of us are working to provide everything for Austin. He is 7 years old, and he was always a bright and cheerful child who could bring a smile to your face even if you were having the worst day just by his childish and cute acts. We used to be busy all week and were not able to provide much affection, but no matter the case, we would always go somewhere out to eat on the weekend by Austin's choice. Austin was asking to go to Domino's Pizza that day, but we could not take him. So we decided to give him a surprise. When we came back from work, Austin was playing with our cat Myuu. We adopted Myuu before Austin was born, and she loved him with all her heart. They were like siblings, inseparable. As we entered the house, Austin came running into my arms as always. "Austin, are you ready for a surprise?" James asked him with a big grin on his face, while I smiled softly, holding Austin in my arms. "Yes, Daddy!" he squealed in excitement and looked at me in hopes to find out about the surprise. "Not this time, Austin. This surprise is from the both of us, so I cannot tell you." I pinched his nose playfully while saying that. He cutely pouted at my response. James and I both started laughing, and looking at us laughing, he also joined in. We sat inside the car, and James drove us to the Domino's Pizza location that was on the verge of the town. When we reached, the time was 11:08 p.m., and their closing time was around 11:30 or something. As Austin saw us entering the pizza place, he was super happy and excited. The place was almost empty except for one or two customers that were sitting in there. We let Austin choose the pizza, and he ordered a family-sized non-veg cheese burst pizza for us. The order was ready within 15 minutes or so, and we started to eat. That was when Austin said that he wanted to use the restroom. "Do you want me to come with you, honey?" I asked while standing up from my chair. "No, Mom, sit down. I'm a big boy now. I can go on my own." Austin said, and he sneakily looked at the girl standing over to the corner. James and I looked at each other and smiled. "Okay, big boy, go on your own then," James said with a big smile on his face. I laughed, looking at Austin blush. He went to the restroom and we waited for him to come back. But Austin did not return even after 20 minutes had passed, which made me worried. A Domino's employee came and told us that it was closing time and we should hurry, so I decided to go and check on Austin. I asked James to come along with me because Austin had gone to the men's room. I waited outside the washroom while James went in to check. After a few minutes, an extremely worried James came out from the washroom carrying Austin in his arms, who was unconscious and had wet his pants as well. Watching my boy in that condition felt like thousands of needles had stabbed deep into my heart. I got so worried that I immediately snatched Austin from his arms and hugged him. I asked James about it, and he told me that he found him in this condition when he went in. We immediately took Austin to the hospital. The doctors told us that he only had a mild fever, and it was also because he had wet his pants, but his heart rate and blood pressure were a bit higher, which made it look like he must have gotten scared of something. After coming back from the hospital, I changed Austin's clothes and took him to my bedroom to sleep, because I was too worried to let him sleep alone. Austin woke up screaming in the middle of the night. I embraced him and patted his back and kept saying that everything was fine and that I was there for him. He cried without speaking a word, and after calming down, he finally slept while I stayed awake, looking after him the entire night. After that day, Austin lost his cheerfulness and stopped speaking, which made me extremely worried. He would often wake up in the middle of the night screaming because of a nightmare. I asked him several times, asking him about what happened in Domino's Pizza, but he kept quiet. After losing every chance to cheer him up, I remembered that he got a crush on the girl whom we last saw at Domino's Pizza, so I decided to let him meet her and ask him, "Austin baby, do you want to meet that girl from Domino's Pizza?" As I asked him this, surprisingly, his eyes got bigger in fright, and he started to scream and have a panic attack. "He's going to kill her! He's going to kill her!" And then he fainted. I did not understand what was happening. I called James and told him that I was taking Austin to the hospital and asked him to come straight there. As James reached, I told him to look after Austin and not to leave his side no matter what. I went to the Domino's to check what made my boy like this. After reaching, I asked around about the girl and found out that she had died. She went to the washroom the same night, and after coming back from there, she died from a heart attack. The strangest part was that she died after we brought unconscious Austin to the hospital. I still could not figure out what happened that day, and how did Austin know that she was about to die? But then one day, I found a drawing that Austin made that looked like a monster with devil horns. This is an incident I witnessed in my first month after joining the New York police force. I was really excited to see my future forward, but within a month, I experienced something horrible that almost took me and my other team members to hell. My name is Brian Ducklet. I am 25 now. At that time, I was just 21, and it was my first month in the New York police squad. I was very happy to work with others and was really excited about all this police and thief kind of stuff, which I had always seen on TV since my childhood. It was a normal day as usual, and I had just reached the police headquarters. I was checking some previous files which my senior had asked me to do when the phone rang. Since everyone was busy with some other task and I was nearest to the phone, I got the opportunity to receive it. I took the phone, and before I could say anything, I heard screams and shouting and a lot of other noise also. I got alert and asked on the phone who was on the other side. After a few seconds, a loud but shrill voice shouted to help them. Someone was in the bank with a gun, and he was trying to rob the bank. I understood everything and asked him for the address. As soon as he told me, I rushed to my senior's office and knocked on the door hard. He asked me to come in and I explained everything. The situation was serious, so without wasting any time, he pushed a buzzer, and within a minute, all the guards gathered in his office. He explained the whole situation and ordered us to deploy our forces around the area and surround the bank. We rushed toward the vehicle, and within 10 minutes, we were outside the bank, which was being robbed. The guards were killed, and the bank was totally silent. No one was coming in or going from the bank, which meant that the robber was inside the bank even now. We got off the vehicle, loaded our guns, and deployed outside the bank while holding our position. Our senior came out and announced with a mic. He warned the robber to surrender and leave this matter peacefully, but no reaction came from the robber. We waited for him outside the bank, but as we were afraid that if we tried to break in, he might kill some hostages. After 10 minutes, we saw someone coming from the bank. He was the robber, but he was wearing a Domino's uniform just like Domino's delivery boy. He had a gun in his hand and a bag in the other. He came out while taking a hostage at the gunpoint with him. He was a clever one and knew that if he would have come alone, that we might have shot him down, but now we were helpless. We couldn't take any action until he was taking that hostage at gunpoint. He started to walk towards us when one of our snipers shot him in the leg. He got injured and fell down there, and the hostage ran away from him. We were running towards him to catch him off guard when he started to shout and asked us to stop where we were if we wanted to be alive. We couldn't understand why he was saying so, but he was a robber and we needed to catch him anyhow, so we walked to him slowly while pointing the gun toward him. He was almost caught, but then came to the twist. He shouted again and told us that he had a bomb inside his jacket which could explode any time, so it was better to stay from him. All this time, he kept on begging us to get away from him, but we didn't listen to him and went too close to him. We all thought that he was just faking this bomb and explosion story to scare us, but when we reached him, the bomb started beeping really loudly. He screamed at us to get away, and before we could turn and run to safety, the bomb detonated, and the pizza delivery boy exploded into pieces. In this incident, I along with 4 other members of our team suffered heavy damage due to that explosion, and we were taken to a nearby hospital immediately. I was unconscious and didn't know what happened in between that time, but when I woke up and recovered a little, I asked my colleague about the whole case, and what he told me really shocked me. He told me that the pizza delivery boy was just a decoy. He was just a puppet whose strings were in other hands, and the main criminal was pulling the strings and forcing him to do whatever he asked. He ordered a pizza from Domino's, and when the delivery boy went to deliver his order, he kidnapped him and strapped the bomb to him. He kept the remote control with him and told him that if he didn't rob the bank and give him the money, he would push the button and the bomb would go off. Now I understood why the robber, who was not actually a robber but a victim, was begging us to get away from him. He was really a nice guy who was trying to save us, even though he knew he was going to die. The real criminal was not caught yet, but the investigation was still going on, and our team was sure to catch him soon. After that day, 3 years have passed, and we have no clue about the real culprit even now. He would be roaming in the city freely, and here we were searching for him, desperately to pay him equally for his crimes.
Let's play rock, paper, scissors to decide who gets to choose what we will be doing today. I suggested and others nodded their head in agreement. Grayson, Derek, Luna, Danielle, Liam and I were all friends since childhood as we lived in the same neighborhood. Our parents also knew that we used to hang out together and were comfortable with the fact that they always knew that we were either at one of our houses or the other. Anyway, as we played rock, paper, scissors, it was Luna who lost, and we knew that she was going to choose. All of us were huge Nintendo fans and loved playing Mario games, but Luna was obsessed with Mario Kart series. And as expected, she chose Mario Kart, and not only that, but she chose that we play the game in the cafe that was near the elementary school. Well, we did not have any problem with that, so we followed her command to the cafe. As we were playing Mario Kart in the cafe, we saw a grown man dressed up in a Luigi costume playing Mario Kart. He looked weird, but had the highest score in the game. We went on to focus on our games, but no matter how hard we tried, none of us were able to get a high score. That was when we heard a snickering sound and turned to see that it was the Luigi man who was laughing at us. "What's so funny, old man? Did your Luigi costume get stuck to you?" It was Derek who said in a very sarcastic tone, which made the rest of us laugh. "No, kid. I was thinking that you would never be able to set a high score this way," he said with a cringeworthy smile on his face. "What do you mean? We won't be able to set the score?" Liam said. He sounded pissed by the man, so I held his hand to calm him. "Well, you know it too, that you have been trying so hard and still haven't managed to set the score. There are tricks for that, which I'm willing to teach you in this case." He said that while scratching his head, which made him look even weirder, but I guess not everyone was thinking the same as me. "And what is that?" Luna asked with a curious voice. In response, he looked at her and gave the same cringe-worthy smile. "How about you play real-life Mario Kart with me?" Bent a bit to match her heights and said, "Real-life Mario Kart? What's that?" It was Grayson who finally spoke after being silent the entire time, and asked, "I have a place where you can play a real Mario Kart," he said with the same smile on his face. I don't know why no one else could tell, but it looked freaky, and the guy also looked shady as hell. To my surprise, Daniel, Liam, Luna, and Grayson agreed to it first. It was only Derek and me who thought it was a bad idea. Before leaving, the guy told us to wear Mario Kart costumes if we wanted to play a real-life Mario Kart. After that, we walked back to our houses while discussing the game. I could not believe no one was talking about that guy, and how weirder it was for him to ask us to play the game. "Are you guys going tomorrow to that abandoned playground the guy asked us to go to?" I asked as the others looked at me. "Of course we are, and you're going to come with us." As expected, it was Luna. "Sorry guys, but I don't think it's such a good idea to follow some stranger's advice," I said, and Derek supported me in this. "No arguments over it, Ryan and Derek. You know Luna would go either way, whether we agreed or not. And we cannot let her go alone, so all of us will be going together," Daniel said with a commanding voice, and we all nodded our heads. Daniel was the oldest among us, so we agreed to do whatever he said. Still, he was a pretty nice guy who always thought about everyone in the group. The next day, we met up in front of Daniel's house. Everyone had managed to prepare and wear the Mario Kart's costumes. Derek was wearing a Yoshi costume, which he had from last year's Halloween party. And Liam and Grayson were both wearing Luigi costumes since it was both of their favorites. Luna thought of something different, and she dressed up as Daisy. And she looked cute in that. Only Daniel and I were the ones who did not wear any costume, which made Luna piss more than the others. I don't know why Daniel did not wear it, but I thought it was childish to dress up as a game character. We headed over to the playground, which was on the outskirts of town, and as we reached, we met the guy waiting for just outside, wearing the same Luigi costume with the same cringy smile on his face. He looked at others wearing costumes and his smile got bigger and bigger. But as he laid his eyes on me and Daniel, he frowned and asked, "Why aren't you two in costumes as I asked you to be?" "We don't have any costumes with us," Daniel said in response for the both of us. He continued frowning for a few minutes, but then said that it would be okay. After that, he led us inside, and there we saw a complete setup for Mario Kart with vehicles for kids decorated to make it look like similar to the ones in the game. He explained the rules to us and then started the race. It was way more fun to play this way than I imagined. All of us were busy playing the game and having fun that we did not notice when Derek disappeared. Daniel was the first one to take notice that Derek was nowhere to be seen, and that's when we asked the guy about it. He shrugged his shoulders, saying that he did not know. I could tell by Daniel's expression that he was also thinking that something was wrong, but the others continued to play. That was when Luna said that she needed to go to the restroom and left for it. We noticed that a minute later, the man was also gone. Daniel stopped everyone from playing and asked us to be ready to leave, and went over to find Luna. After about 10 minutes, we saw Luna come running towards us while screaming, looking all terrified. Daniel told me to run. That man is psycho and he caught him. She said, while running, we saw the guy chasing her, so we started running as well. The man kept chasing us the entire time, and that was when we spotted a police car and stopped it. The two officers came out and asked us what was going on, and as we told them everything, the officers looked around, but it seemed that the man had hidden somewhere. We told the officers about Derek and Daniel being held up somewhere by that man, and they promised to look for them. After dropping us home, the officers discussed something with their parents and left. Hours passed, and there were still no signs of Derek and Daniel. My parents told me that the police were still looking for them, and that they would find them sooner. The next evening, the police informed the parents that they had found the bodies of the young boys brutally murdered, and the bodies were hidden under a slide of the playground. The parents were called to identify the bodies to check if it was Derek and Daniel, and I guess it was, because the next day the funeral was held for them. We still don't know what happened that day when Daniel went after Luna, and she did not tell us either. Instead, she'd gone completely silent after that day. A few days later, I heard my parents talking to that man in the Luigi costume that was arrested. And indeed, he was a serial killer who often lured kids in and murdered them. I know it's bad and selfish of me to think that, but I thought that it was a relief that the rest of us had gone out of there as we did.
My father moved to America when I was in 8th grade. We were originally from Liverpool. I was born and raised Geordie, and to get out of Liverpool and to go all the way to America was a very big transition for me, both education-wise and culturally. Even though we are at an extent quite same, but there are certain differences that are major, and one of the crucial major differences that had a major effect on my life was of football. Now, being a lad from Liverpool, football is something that is very close to our hearts. It is like we are born with the genetics of football passion in us, and coming to America, I had no idea football was a thing. To keep in mind, this was before internet was a thing, so there were a lot of things that we had no clue about. We moved to America in May, and it was a tiring move. My father recently started working for the New York Times, so we had to move, and since he was given a decent place to live in, it was just me and my dad. And I was to start the school early, and it was a new school in the New York, and definitely it was fancier than the public school back in Liverpool. The first day of the school was not something that I would have thought it to be. It was in high school with a curriculum that was a bit difficult for me to understand. Classes were going everywhere, and we had to move so much from one class to another. I had no idea where to go or what to sign. It was too much, and too many classes, and I never had all of that in Liverpool, so I was a tad bit confused about everything. And so there was this sports sheet that I got, and in there was written football, and somehow everything felt right. Football was my calling, and I picked it up quick. It was certain that football was the only thing that was common thing between New York and Liverpool, and I got back all excited and told my father, and he was not happy and was a bit annoyed and asked me, "What are you going to do to be an NFL star?" I never understood half the things my father told me, and I told him that I am in for the trials, and he said, "You're a scrawny little Georgie, you'll get battered there." And I said to Dad, "They are Yanks, I will get them." And the next day, one of the guys from the classes helped me with the football thing and gave me this weird kit to wear. I just ignored and wore my usual shorts and jersey and went out. And as I went out on the pitch, I saw really built up guys, and there was something different about the pitch. There were no goal stands. The ball was not even red, and the pitch was like that of rugby, and I realized what happened. I couldn't believe they called rugby football. I wanted to get away from the pitch, but they dragged me in. I wasn't sure why, but they dragged me in the game. The coach went crazy and screamed, "All right, we're going to make men out of you boys." And then he looked at me and screamed, "Come here, Oliver Twist, show us what you got." And he called me and told me to tackle one of his guys. And I just didn't understand what was going on. And then one of his guys ran and tackled me hard, and I dropped dead in that exact moment. Everything blacked out as I fell. I woke up later, and by the time I did, the games were over.
I wasn't selected, and the boys were out there making fun of me, and I asked them, "Why do you call it football? That is not football." And then one of the guys says, "This is American football. It is played like that." And then I said, "Football is not this. Liverpool, Manchester United, now that's football." And they were pissed and smacked me. These Yanks punished me for not liking their game, even though their game was nothing like how games should be. And they told me to play their game. And in my cockiness, I decided that I will do it. And we went to the pitch. The game started, and it wasn't like the football that I was used to, but there was a lot of running in the pitch. I found myself in the pitch, and I was ready to take the game. The ball was in my hand. It was already a free kick if it was a real football, and I ran through the pitch into the goal thing, and they told me to drop the ball, and I did. They were cheering and calling touchdown. I was busy saying this is not the real football no matter what, and there wasn't even a whistle. One of the guys handed me the ball, and the other guy who was heavy tackled me hard and fell upon me. And as he did, I shouted in pain, and as I heard something pop, and there I saw the bone in left hand and leg popped out as a 200-pound kid fell upon my scrawny body, and I was shouting and in pain, and then passed out due to the pain. I woke up, and I saw us in the hospital. My father wasn't really there. He was out covering a news in another state. So it was me in the shady old New York hospital. The physical pain of broken bones was way less than the pain that I felt of being alone, and no one there. That is when I realized, of all the places, America is one of the places that I would never visit if I ever get back to Liverpool, and NFL still should work on it and not call itself a football league. I was abducted at the age of 8 by a sadist man named Luca, and I've been living as his sex and torture slave since then. The day I was abducted, I was playing in the park when he came to me and started to talk with me nicely. He told me his daughter, who could not walk, was in his car and asked me if I would like to play with her. He asked me to follow him, and I thought he was a good person, so I followed him. Big mistake, right? Yes, I know that now, but I was 8 back then. I know at that age we all have been immature, but always acted like we were mature enough to differentiate between good and bad. I followed him while talking to him as soon as we reached the car. He put a handkerchief over my nose, and I passed out. When I woke up, I was in a huge room, and that man was sitting beside me and staring. I started crying and asking him to let me go home, but he slapped me hard and told me to keep my mouth shut or he would kill me. I was terrified, so I followed his command like a scared puppy. He looked at me lustfully while smiling like a monster, which terrified me even more. After that, he came closer and tore my clothes. I did not know what was happening to me, but I was so scared that he was going to kill me, so I kept quiet and sobbed silently. But then he started doing something to me which was painful as hell. I started to bleed, and I thought I was going to die. I kept screaming, but the monster did not stop, and I passed out eventually. When I woke up, I was alone in the room, and my entire body was hurting like crazy. I tried to get up, but I felt dizzy and fell. I was feeling a sharp pain in the lower half of my body, and I was unable to move. I thought I was going to die back then when I thought he was trying to kill me, but I guessed that I may have survived somehow. After that, I started to think about how to run from there. But as I was unable to move my body, I kept lying on the bed while thinking. All I could think was to hide somewhere. But then the man came back. He looked at me, and without saying anything, pulled out a small iron rod. He beat my legs over and over again until they started to bleed. And then when he was done, he said, "I know you must be thinking of running away, but now you won't be able to. From this, you won't be able to move for a few days." After that, He did the same thing as before to hurt me and continued doing it day after day. It's been years, and I am stuck in this hellhole, unable to run from him. He makes me do chores, beats me up with different tools each time, and rapes me continuously. A new reality television show has been aired these days, Power Slap, which he watches every night. He makes me sit with him and watch them together. The contestants slap each other continuously until one of them wins. Sometimes they are even knocked out by this. As I just told you, he makes me sit with him to watch, which what I meant by that is that the psycho not only watches Power Slap, but performs it on me while watching the show until I am knocked out each time. And if I try to block him in the process, he starts to kick me and tell me not to do that. As a result, I am continuously in pain throughout the day, and I started to have several concussions, but he doesn't care. Today was the 7th day in a row that he called me to watch that sick show Power Slap with him. I was trembling the entire time sitting there while he kept hitting me. With the last slap, I was knocked out unconscious, and then I woke up while he was standing over me with a packet in his hands, staring at my belly annoyingly. He handed me the thing and left after telling me what to do. It was a pregnancy test. I was supposed to pee on it, and if 2 pink lines were to show in there, I was to immediately tell him about it. I figured 2 pink lines mean pregnancy. I was hoping for it to be negative while taking it because I did not want my child to suffer the same fate as me. But my prayers went into vain when another pink line got visible after the one. I started to panic. If I were to tell him, he would take the child away from me and go through these things with the child as well. I was called by him and figured that it was time for Power Slap. I had decided what to do and how to save my child from suffering the same fate as me. So I quietly went there and I was walking, and I saw his bag. He was sitting on the sofa watching the show. I moved there without making a noise and stood behind him. As he was about to turn, I slapped him in the back of the neck with a knife that I brought from the kitchen. His eyes popped out in vain, and he died while looking straight into my eyes. I never knew it was this easy to get rid of him. If I knew, I would have done this earlier, but I guess I wasn't brave enough. Thank God that this pregnancy changed me in a good way, enough to remove all the problems away from my future child's life. I turned my head toward the television. The Power Slap's 8th episode was streaming. I sat next to his dead body, turned his face toward the television, and said, "You should see the final episode to find out who won." I cannot believe it. He's doing it again. It's the 5th day in a row. This is so irritating. I woke up as soon as I slept from the noises coming from the apartment above mine. My sleep schedule is getting distorted because of him. He seems to be a huge fan of Power Slap because he has been playing every single episode in a loop all night for the past few days. At first I was okay with this, but now it is just getting frustrating. You must be thinking, what is going on here, right? Then let's start from the beginning. It was 8 a.m. and I was getting ready for work when suddenly I heard the fire alarm. I opened my apartment door to find out what was going on, and I saw that everyone was running out with essentially stuff in their hands. That was when someone stopped by me and said, "Get out of this building. There is a huge fire on the 3rd floor and it's only getting bigger." I went inside and took my car keys, wallets, cards, laptop, and whatever I thought needed saving. After taking them hurriedly, I went out of my apartment and exited the building. I put things in my car and took them out as well. I was wishing that the fire did not spread to my apartment, because if that were to happen, I would be homeless. After a few minutes, it looked like the fire had spread to my floor as well. That was when I heard the sound of the fire department's vehicle. They told us that we could go to our work because it would take time to extinguish the fire from the building. I half-heartedly went to work and was wishing for my apartment to be okay. When I came back, I saw that my apartment was not in living condition. They told us to stay somewhere else for the time being till they fixed our apartments. I had nowhere else to go. I went through ads to find an apartment on an urgent basis, but I was so unlucky that I could not find any. After that, I went to stay the night at a hotel. I was having dinner at a nearby restaurant when I saw a flyer. It said, "Tenant needed for a one-bedroom apartment urgently." The rent was also cheap, so I immediately called even at the time because I did not want to lose this to someone else. The owner told me to come the next morning. The next day I went to see the apartment, and it was just a small one-room with a bath attached to it. It wasn't an ideal one, but I had no other choice, so I just signed the lease agreement for it. I had already told the owner about my condition, so the agreement was made according to that. When I was moving, I saw a man, big, huge built, but he must be in his 40s, going up the stairs. I figured he must be someone who lived here. The owner told me that not many people lived here in the building. There were only 2 other apartments occupied outside of mine, one on the first floor and another on the upper floor than mine. That night, as I was about to sleep, I heard noises coming from upstairs. Basically, it was the sound of someone watching the Power Slap reality television show. I thought it would stop after an episode or so, but it continued the entire night. Guess someone must be a huge fan of Power Slap. That's what I thought. Tried sleeping. But it was of no use because I could not sleep at all. The next day, I was feeling tired throughout the day and I could not focus on work. I thought I would complete my sleep tonight, but I was wrong, because as I was about to sleep, I heard the voice of the Power Slap's first episode starting louder than last night. I tossed and turned in frustration all night, thinking that it was okay and maybe I would be able to sleep the next night. But the same thing continued the next night, and the night after that. And it's not like I did not tell the building owner about it. I did. But he said that he does not interfere with the issues in the building, and we were supposed to deal with it on our own. So I decided to talk to him face to face. The next morning before going to work, I went to the floor and rang his doorbell, but there was no answer. I continued to ring the doorbell, but even after half an hour, there was no response. So I thought maybe he's not in his apartment. After that, I went to work and decided I would talk to the guy today, no matter what. After coming back from work, I directly went to his floor, and instead of ringing the doorbell, I started to bang on the door. But no response this time either. I went back to my apartment and was hoping that he would not play Power Slap tonight, but I was wrong again. I woke up from my sleep to the noises coming from upstairs, which were louder than ever. I stomped out of my apartment in frustration and went upstairs. No one opened, even after ringing the bell or banging the door, but I decided to talk to him no matter what because I did not sleep a wink for the past few days and I felt like I was getting mad. I looked around and saw the kitchen window open on the left side of the floor, so I decided to call him through that because apparently he was unable to hear all my voices coming from the television. But what I saw through that made me feel sick and terrified to my bones. The man was sitting on the couch eating a human leg while staring at the TV and watching Power Slap like a psycho. There was a man's body hanging near him without legs or hands. The blood was dripping on the floor from his body. I felt sick from the scene that I had witnessed. The man picked up the remote, turned on the volume, and picked up something that looked like a knife, but was huge in comparison. I ran from there immediately to my apartment and locked the door from inside. I was too terrified to think of anything at the moment, so I just curled up in my bed the entire night. The next day, I packed my stuff from there and ran out of the apartment. I booked a hotel room and decided to stay there for the next few days. After that, I called the owner of the building, telling him about my moving out, whatever was happening on the upper floor. I don't know if he knew about it or not, but I decided to not get involved in this any further. Chicken move, right? I know. But I'm not one of them who has the guts to take action and face the criminal in any way possible. I have no idea how many days it's going to take for my apartment to get fixed, so I'll be staying in this hotel till then. Not this again. I woke up from the nightmare, and my left cheek was stinging from the sharp pain. I turned on the lights and went near the mirror to check. My left cheek was swollen, and there was a red bruise over it, which was fresh, as if someone had just hit me. I checked the right cheek, and its bruises had faded a bit. I have been having these nightmares since the day I left Power Slap, but they were not this frequent. I only used to have them once a week, or sometimes only a few times within a month, but these days they are getting frequent. Today is the third time I had this nightmare within a week, which is a first. After checking the cheek, I put some ointment over the bruises and then went back to my room. I could not fall asleep for some reason, so I took out my phone and started scrolling through it. The next day after coming back from work, I took a shower and then ordered something to eat. I lived alone, so I used to eat delivery food. After about half an hour or so, my doorbell rang and I went to open it, and it was the delivery guy. I took the order and closed the door after giving him a tip. After dinner, I watched TV for some time and then prepared myself to sleep. I usually drank chamomile tea before bed, but for some reason, I did not want to tonight, so I directly went to sleep. I opened my eyes, and I was in the ring of Power Slap. I looked around, and there was no one there except for the person sitting opposite. His face was blurred, so I could not figure out who it was, but I was able to see the rest of the body, which looked like it was artificially made from steel. I immediately understood the situation I was in. It was the nightmare that I kept having. Sweat started to drop from my forehead, and I struggled to get away from my seat, but it felt like I was glued there. No matter how much harder I tried to pull myself together to get up, I was unable to budge even an inch. That was when the buzzer started to make its sound, and it was finally time for the match. But my hand was frozen as well as the rest of my body. As soon as the buzzer stopped, I was struck in the face with a tight slap without even a warning. It felt like I was hit with an iron rod. I couldn't even get to feel the pain when I was struck again on the right cheek, which felt harder than before. And I started to feel dizzy by that. That person kept slapping me continuously without giving me a chance to pull myself together. I was wishing to wake up from the nightmare, but it frighteningly kept going on. That was when another tight slap came, and not only did it bruise my cheeks badly, but I felt as if my lips had started to bleed. I woke up from the sudden and extreme pain. I felt a sigh of relief. Not only that, but I immediately went to the bathroom to check, and my lips were bleeding. My face was all sore and aching from that slap. My body was feeling exhausted, and not only did my face hurt, but my hands and other body parts were aching as well. I thought it must be because of the nightmare I had, but still, I could not understand how I could get the wounds from my nightmare in real life. The next day, I decided to go to the doctor for this and asked my office to inform them that I'd be taking a leave. My boss was too much of a bitch to approve it, but I still told him that I won't be able to come in. After that, I went to the doctor and got the wounds treated. When I told him about my condition, he suggested me a neurologist. The neurologist asked me about my medical history and some other questions related to my sleeping problems. After some tests, he asked me to visit again after 2 days. That night, I was scared of sleeping because, as rare as it was, I had 5 incidents within a week of that nightmare. I was frightened by the thought that I could suffer from that nightmare tonight as well. The doctor had given me Klonopin. That medicine I knew was to treat anxiety, but I thought maybe he has a reason to prescribe this to me. so I took it before going to bed. I could not bring myself to fall asleep that night because of the frightening feeling I was having. Around 3 a.m., I fell asleep, and as soon as I did, I opened my eyes in the ring of the Power Slap arena again. The feeling of terror started to creep over me, and this time, my body didn't feel like it was stuck or glued. Instead, it felt as if my entire body was paralyzed from the neck. I was alone in the ring this time, so I started to pray for the person with a blurred face to not come. But I was not that lucky. After a few minutes, I saw him coming, and his body looked bigger than the last time. As he was coming closer, my heartbeat was getting so loud that I could hear it myself. I started to sweat from fear. He came and sat across me, and just after that, I heard the buzzer sound starting. It was not just a nightmare that I was having. It felt as if I am living this nightmare. The buzzer sound stopped, and a loud sound of the slap echoed, and before I could get used to it, I felt another tight iron hand slap on my face. I think I felt my jaw being dislocated, and before I could think of any thought, another one came within the period of 2 seconds. I felt a sharp pain in my tongue. My tooth broke and got stuck in the corner of my tongue. Thank God that I woke up. I ran to the bathroom stumbling and saw blood coming out from the corner of my mouth. My jaws were hurting and I was feeling dizzy. I opened my mouth and saw the tooth that was stuck to my tongue. I somehow managed to pull it out, but I started to lose consciousness. And that was when I felt that my hands were also aching to an unbearable extent. I somehow managed to stay conscious and called Hannah, my girlfriend, and asked her to take me to the emergency room. And right after the call, I passed out. I woke up in a hospital bed and Hannah was talking to the doctor. My entire face was covered in dressing bandages, and I guess they had put my jaw back in place, which I could tell by the pain and the bandages wrapped around there. "Who did this to you?" Hannah asked me with a concerned voice. I kept quiet because of the pain. I was unable to speak. "Let him rest, ma'am, and don't make him talk." A nurse came and warned Hannah. After that, Hannah told me that she will be back, and left. I got discharged that evening, and doctors told me to take some precautions to help me. I called my neurologist after that and told him about everything. Surprisingly, he told me to perform a weird experiment on myself. That night before going to bed, I tied my hand to the corners of the bed. It was a difficult thing to do, but I still managed to tie them. That night, I fell asleep early because of all the effects of the medicine, and I woke up in the power slap ring again. But this time, the person with the blurred face did not hit me even once. Instead, he kept sitting across from me. I was still terrified the entire time. I woke up the next morning, and it was a hassle to untie myself, but I still managed to do it after a struggle. I was having extreme pain in my wrist area. I guess I may have tried to free myself during sleep, which must be because of the nightmare. But I was feeling relieved a bit that I was not hit this time. I had an appointment with my neurologist today and had already informed my boss about my leave period because of a medical issue. He was still the same, but who cares? I needed the time off from work for my treatment. I went to the doctor and gave him every single detail. He told me that his diagnosis was complete and I have REM sleep behavior disorder. According to his diagnosis, REM sleep behavior disorder is something which the patient harms himself and often suffers from unpleasant dreams. So I was the one hurting myself. I could not believe it. He told me several reasons that led to this, including guilt, trauma, or stress which could have caused this. He prescribed it for me and asked me to come back the next day for a nocturnal sleep study. I was extremely exhausted and did not want to go back to my apartment. My entire face was covered in bandages and everything was just hurting. That was when I heard the voice of an old woman. "Oh my, you have a spirit attached to you." As she said that, I looked at her in disbelief, thinking she had gone senile, but she continued. "It's someone you killed. Be careful, boy. He doesn't look like he's planning on leaving." She handed me a bracelet saying it would help me while looking at me with sympathetic eyes and left. I kept staring at the bracelet in my hand, and suddenly, John came to my mind. It was the last match of the Power Slap, and I was up against a man named John who was infamous for his brutal slaps and never lost a match to anyone. Well, it was not the original Power Slap, not like the reality show. It was a different one that followed all the rules and everything as the original one. I wanted to win at any cost, so I brought dozens of sleeping pills along with some others, crushed them, and carefully spiked his energy drink, which he drank entirely. The effects kicked in, and as soon as the buzzer stopped, I continuously slapped him, making his face swell up. He lost the game and fell unconscious, and he woke up after getting good sleep. But for some reason, the effects of the sleeping pills did not fade. The next day, he excused himself and left without saying a word. I could tell that he was dizzy. That evening, I got the news that he died in an accident while he was driving back home. I guess he may have fell asleep while driving. Was that the reason I am having sleeping problems? I thought, while putting the bracelet on.
Man, you have to come in the reunion. It won't be fun without you. It was my best friend Eric from high school. He had called me to inform me about our high school reunion. Who else is coming? I asked. Everyone is coming, bro, so you have to come too. What about Martin? I asked, and there was a silence for a minute, and then Eric spoke. Did you not hear? Martin's dead, bro. I could not understand what to reply after hearing this. I know you must be confused, so let me tell you a little backstory. There was a boy in our class who was a bit of a book nerd. His name was Finn White. There was a group of 4 boys, Wilson, Harris, Andrew, and Martin, who often bullied him. They used to make him run on errands for them, writing insults and sticking it on his back. Their bullying did not stop only on that, but they often beat Finn after school. There was an alley behind the school. They used to take him there and make him stand on his knees for hours. While he used to do that, they would smoke and pass insults about him and his parents. Everyone knew about Finn being bullied, but kept silent. The teachers ignored and let them bully Finn. Instead of stopping, the bullying only kept getting worse day by day. One day during a lunch break, I heard Finn scream. Everyone, along with me, turned around and saw that Finn was freaking out. I looked down a bit and saw someone had replaced his lunch with insects in his lunchbox. Wilson and Martin came laughing as if it was funny, and both of them put his hands around his shoulders. Then all of a sudden, Martin said while laughing, "Eat it." We thought he was just joking, but then he actually forcefully fed it to him, and we got shocked. I felt sick and left the room, and when I came back, I saw Martin was laughing and Finn was throwing up. Even Wilson, who often bullied Finn, looked shocked by Martin's behavior. One day during math class, the teacher gave us a problem on the board. It was a difficult one. The teacher called Martin to solve it. He couldn't. Then the teacher asked the whole class, "Whoever knows how to solve this problem, raise your hand." It was Finn who raised his hand. The teacher called him and asked him to solve it. Finn solved the problem correctly and was praised by the teacher, but Martin felt humiliated by that, and as soon as the teacher left, he grabbed Finn by the hair and started punching and kicking him. We went rushing toward them and pulled him away from Finn. He glared at us and left. The next day, Martin was called into the teacher's office and was warned that if it continued any further, he will get suspended. They stopped bullying Finn at school. But after school, they used to take him every day and beat him. One time, I saw naked Finn trying to cover himself while Martin had his clothes, and other boys were making a video of him. The reason I never interfered with them was that I was scared if I say something they will start bullying me too. And I think other students must be thinking the same. They threatened Finn that they will release the video if he didn't do as they say. These things kept happening, but Martin was the one who always used to take the bullying too far. Finn started to look weaker and depressed than usual. He started skipping schools, and whenever he did, the next day the bullying would just get doubled. But then, all of a sudden, he stopped coming to school. We all thought he must be skipping as usual, but the third day, instead of Finn, the principal came to inform us that he made the decision to end his misery. All the class went silent and started to look toward Martin. He noticed everyone looked at him, and he shouted, "Hey, I'm not the only one who used to bully Finn." He looked at Wilson, Harris, and Andrew after saying that, but they turned their gazes away. After that day, they stopped hanging out with Martin. Other students started to call him names, and now he was the center of attention. They all blamed him for Finn's death. Several incidents started to occur with him, such as his locker would be filled with threatening letters, and killers would be written over his locker's door. Martin stopped speaking. He would silently come to class and silently leave. I was also among those who blamed him for Finn's death, but I never did those things to him. His ex-best friend Wilson was among those who used to stick killer on his desk and would often address him as a killer. At one point, I stopped blaming him and started pitying him because he was also getting bullied by the whole school. Martin was not the only one to blame for Finn's death. Martin's friends who bullied him along with him were to blame as well, and so were the rest of us and the teachers for not stepping up to put a stop over this. Finn must be hoping for others to help, and can't tell since when Finn was planning on killing himself. It must be the case that after losing all hopes of getting help, he made the decision to end his misery. Now it was the Martin who was facing criticism and getting bullied by the other kids. One day, Martin's parents came to school to ask about his son. They told the teachers that he is distancing himself from others, and after coming from school, he just locks himself in his room. And after hearing that his son bullied a kid to this extent, they went back in disappointment. Martin eventually dropped out of high school during the end of senior year, and I never heard about him ever since. My family moved to a different state as soon as I graduated, so I had no idea what happened to him. The bullied and the bully both are dead, and there are several other cases like this all around the world because of negligence of teachers who don't take action against bullying. 20% of middle schoolers and high schoolers are victims of bullying each year. Less adult supervision provides more opportunity to bully or be bullied. You may have heard of multiple stories where the stepmom bullies their children, abuses them, etc. Or the stories where the wife abuses the mistress and her children, or vice versa. But what I have experienced is nothing like that. It was the opposite of this. I ran away from my home at a very young age because of all the abuse that I was going through and came to Chicago. Apart from the money and jewelry that I had stolen from my mother's safe, I had nothing else. I sold the jewelry and found a place to stay for a few days. One thing that I was sure about was that my mother may have sent someone after me. Not because she loved me, cared for me, or anything like that. It was because I was someone she could vent her anger, frustrations, and insecurities. Well, it was my bad luck that I was born from her, and on top of that, with these looks. My mother married my father only for money. There was no love involved in that marriage. I don't know the reason my father married her and never divorced her, but even I at the age could notice the hatred mother had for him. Mother never once looked at me with love or motherly feeling. I know the reason. It was because every single time she looked at me, I reminded her of my father. And when father brought in a mistress for him, she started to beat me, punish me, and abuse me instead of him. I bared with that behavior of hers for 12 years and hoped that maybe someday she would realize that I was not only my father's child, but her blood also flowed through my veins. But it only got worse over time. So one day, I sneaked the keys to her safe, stole money and jewelry from it, and flew from there. While staying in Chicago, I found a part-time job in a grocery store and started working there. There was a Starbucks cafe outlet just across the street, and you could see everything that went around there from the store. One day, when I was waiting for the store to open because I reached earlier that day, I saw a tall, dark-haired man with a tan, muscular body. He must have been double my age, but my jaw dropped by looking at him. I kept staring at him, and when he turned back, his eyes met mine, and he passed a smile to me. It made me feel butterflies in my stomach, and I knew what it was. I started to have a crush on one of the baristas working there. I guessed that he must be working as a barista. I changed my routine to match his time and started to come earlier than the store opening time. After reaching, I would wait for him to come and open the cafe. It became my routine, and he would always pass a bright smile to me, which would make my day. One day while I was waiting for him and daydreaming, I noticed it was someone else who came in instead. I thought maybe he would be late, so I waited, but he did not show up. And the same day while I was working, I noticed him going into the cafe with a woman as a customer. The woman's figure looked familiar, but I could not see her face. Watching him with another woman made my chest tight with an uneasy feeling. After my shift ended, as I was about to leave for my apartment, I noticed him kissing that woman in a nearby alley. The feeling I was having at that time crossed far beyond the limit of jealousy. He pulled his lips away from her, and my entire body started to tremble from anger. It was my so-called mother. Her eyes met mine. Her lips formed an evil smirk, and she grabbed him by his hair. She pulled him closer and kissed him. I understood why she was doing that. She may have had someone tail me and figured out that I liked this guy. She was warning me by this, that I could not have anything without her permission. I cannot describe the rage I was feeling at the moment, and I could have let it go if she stopped there. But the next day, as I was working, I noticed her flirting with while sitting inside the Starbucks cafe. In a fit of extreme rage, I went into the hardware section and took a wrench. I walked into the cafe while hiding the wrench behind me. She did not notice me and was leaning on the counter, flirting with the nasty, slutty dress that she was wearing. As she touched his hand, I got furious and stepped toward her. I hit her on the head from behind with all my might and continued hitting. I heard multiple screams around me, but I could not focus on anything else. I broke her skull with continuous hits, and someone forcefully pulled me away from her. She died right there, I guess, but all I could feel was the rage, and I wanted to hit her bloody face more, because that is how much I hated her. As someone was grabbing me, I noticed him running over her with tears filled in his eyes. He looked at me with disgust and hate, which broke my heart. But I was feeling relieved that I had killed the monster who had destroyed me completely. He held her in his arms and checked if she was alive. My legs were feeling numb, and I fell there. After a while, I heard the sound of a police siren coming closer. As I was confessing this, the investigator was looking at me with eyes of disbelief. I guess he never had to go through harassment in his life, but you never know if someone is wearing a mask on his face or not. It was one late night when I was working on some new designs to present at my upcoming meeting, and since it was for a new company we had recently signed a contract with, it had to be perfect. All of a sudden, I started to feel hungry, so I decided to go to the Subway outlet near that was 24 hours open. I grabbed my wallet and wore a jacket because it was the time when the weather used to get a little chilly during the night. After that, I headed inside the house, and since the place wasn't that far from my place, I decided to walk there. As I was walking towards the place, I noticed 3 SUV vans parked near my abandoned hospital building. It felt a bit weird and out of place, but I ignored it and continued walking. About 20 minutes later, I reached the outlet, but it looked like there was no one there. The outlet was open, but there wasn't a single staff in sight. Because I was hungry and had no other option at the moment, I decided to wait there for anyone to show up. I kept waiting for about more than half an hour, but no one showed up. So I thought that I should wait a little while longer, and if no one comes, I would leave the place and head back home. I checked the time on my wristwatch, and it was 12:20 a.m. More than an hour had passed, and I looked around to see if anyone was coming or not. Trust me, still, there wasn't a single soul in sight. So I decided to go to the washroom and then head back home. I went to the washroom because it had been a while since I was holding my pee. It took me around 10 minutes there, and as I exited the washroom, I saw an old-looking employee standing over the counter. I walked to him and asked where he has been for the past hour. He did not respond and kept staring at me. It did not seem like he would be answering my question anytime soon. So I decided to order the dishes that I had already decided on an hour ago. After giving him my order, my paying for it, I went back to my seat and started to wait for it to arrive. Another half an hour passed, and that employee had disappeared again, and all of it was getting annoying. I slammed my hand over the counter and shouted, "This is getting absurd! Do you guys not value your customers or what?" As I said that, a man wearing the clothes of a watchman came outside while rubbing his eyes and asked me what had happened. As I told him about the situation and about the employee that had been making me wait for more than hours, he looked at me with a terrified expression, as if he had seen a real-life ghost or something. "Was the man half bald and wearing a knitted blue scarf sloppily?" he asked in a trembling voice. "Yes." I hesitated a bit at his reaction, but then replied in a hesitant voice. His face went pale from my response, and I could tell he wasn't acting or anything, but he was terrified by the description of that employee. He turned around slowly and started to walk out of the outlet. As he was walking out, I called out for him multiple times, but he did not respond once. I turned toward the counter, and the old man was standing there staring at me while holding my order. His sudden appearance gave me a jump scare, but since I could not understand the situation, I asked him about the watchman that was just here a few seconds ago. Unlike the watchman, he looked unfazed when I asked him about it. He stared at me for a while and then let out a long sigh. I know many people say this to me to make me feel guilty, but that watchman died a long time ago, and I don't feel even a bit of remorse or guilt about killing the guy because he raped and murdered my 5-year-old granddaughter. He went silent after speaking for the first time and kept his head down. I took my order and went back to the seat and continued eating. While eating, I looked over the counter again, and that employee was gone again. As I finished eating and was about to stand up, I felt a presence in my back, so I turned to get another jump scare by the old employee standing closer to my ears and asking, "How was the food?" "It was good, thank you," I replied while holding my chest because it was beating like crazy. The employee turned to leave, and I felt my eyes popping out of my head from the horrifying scene and my heart thumping even louder. The back head was bleeding and there was a deep wound over it. The blood wasn't dripping on the floor, so I figured the man was another ghost. I hurriedly stood up to leave before I could pass out from the extreme terror, and as I was leaving the outlet, I encountered another young-looking employee, and all I could think about was that this person must be a ghost as well, just like the other two employees. I screamed a frightened scream and started to run toward my apartment. After reaching my apartment, I went directly to my room and curled all over my bed, all terrified and trembling. I decided to Google the place online, and when I did, I found out that about 4 years ago, a man murdered a watchman at night in the subway outlet and ended up dying in between the struggle. Apparently, the watchman was a sex offender and had sexually assaulted many girls, one day kidnapping the granddaughter of an employee working in the subway and murdered the poor soul after raping her. When the employee found out about it, he killed the man in a fit of rage, and when the watchman was struggling to free himself, the employee's head got bumped into a stone and he started bleeding. Still, the employee managed to kill the watchman, but ended up dying from excessive bleeding through his head. Ever since then, there have been many incidents reported that people have been seeing those two at night.
The nuisance building owner. This is about that time when, along with my best friend Hannah, we decided to open a nature-themed restaurant. It was Hannah's idea, and as her best friend, I had faith in her idea. So we started to look for affordable places, but it was harder than anything. That was when we found a rooftop, one-room apartment. The area wasn't that popular, but we still decided to take it on a lease. And on top of that, it was affordable. We talked to the owner and gave him the advance after signing the contract. He gave us the key, and then we started to work on it the next day. We started working on our own, converted the room into a kitchen, and decorated the place by adding items of furniture, different types of plants, and other things. The rest of the rooftop was converted into a place where customers would be sitting and enjoy their time there. After days of hard work, the restaurant was finally ready, and it looked better than our expectations. Hannah was the one who worked harder than anyone else on this. She would wake up early in the morning and go outside to promote the place, then come back and clean the area. Both of us were working hard, but she was trying to do more than me to make the place a success. And I did. After a month, the people started to show interest in our restaurant. They found our restaurant unique and were intrigued by the theme. Within a few months, the business started to boom, and the restaurant became popular. But one day, the owner of the building suddenly showed up and started to demand some percentage of the profits, saying that it was his place and he deserved it. We denied, saying to him that we'd already paid the lease money in full, and that it was us who made the place popular and not him, and there was no contribution of him to this place. After several of his threats, when we did not agree to share our profits with them, he told us that he would not renew the lease as agreed upon. Contract we signed was for 1 year, and 6 months had already passed. After he was gone, Hannah looked distressed the entire day. I talked to her and told her that we could collect enough money to move the restaurant to a bigger and better place. After convincing her, we continued focusing on the restaurant and decided to save more money by the time the contract expired. But a few days later, the owner converted the first floor into a sauna bathhouse as he realized that the place was getting more popular by the day. So he grabbed the opportunity and made it beneficial for him. He started snatching our customers before they could even reach our restaurant. He made the sauna's bath theme a traditional one to lure customers in. I was getting frustrated day by day because the craze of our restaurant started to fade because of him. It wasn't just Hannah this time who was stressed. We both were. I loved Hannah too much, and watching her lose her sleep over this was getting to me. She was working harder than before, and she was trying to promote the place even more. But it was only doing well to the building owner because he was getting the customers without even moving his hand. He included his wife in this little scheme of his as well. One night I woke up to the voice of Hannah crying, and it broke my heart to watch Hannah feel devastated. I knew how many efforts and time we both had put into this, and how Hannah's efforts were even greater than mine. The next day, the building owner mocked us, saying that he'll be making sure that we're broke before the time of our agreement ends, so that we cannot move the restaurant anywhere else. That day, as we were working, Hannah looked tired and defeated, which was crushing me on the inside. I was feeling a bit of rage, and that was directed towards the building owner and his wife. And in the fit, I decided to take revenge. I knew that the owner's wife used to take a bath after closing time before heading home. She was a beautiful woman, and a part-timer from the neighboring flower store had a major crush on her. That was not all. I knew that the building owner, even having such a gorgeous wife, had a weakness for young beautiful women and could not resist taking improper advances towards them. So I carefully observed them for a few days, and one day, when I had the chance, I sent the part-timer saying that I needed something from the sauna bath, knowing that the building owner's wife was there enjoying the sauna bath. And I had already asked the owner if I could enjoy the sauna bath alone when no one would be there, telling him the same time as her wife, because I knew no matter how much he hated us, he would not deny this opportunity to sexually harass me. So after setting up the trap, I simply hid there to enjoy the show. I only wanted to cause a conflict between the husband and the wife because the ownership of the sauna bath along with the building was shared between them. So if they were to get divorced, it could affect the sauna baths negatively, and our business would start blooming again. At that time, I had no idea what I'd put under action. When the building owner entered the sauna after closing time, he noticed that someone was in one of the sauna bathrooms. So he thought it must be me and entered. But what he saw was not me, and instead, his wife in an inappropriate position with the part-timer. The two of them were having sex. He got furious by the scene he had just witnessed and started to beat the part-timer up. And when the part-timer fell unconscious from the beating, he grabbed his wife by the hair and dragged her, beating her instead. He did not realize how far he'd gone until he had felt that his wife wasn't moving anymore. So he checked her pulse only to realize that she was dead. He flew from there after that, and as I was hiding and watching them, I witnessed everything. Sauna baths did not have any surveillance cameras installed, so the only witness was me and the unconscious part-timer. I immediately called 911 explaining the situation, and of course, left out the part about my plan going wrong. I only told them that I went there for a bath and witnessed the whole scene. The police came and took the testimony of both the part-timer and me. The search for the building owner started, and he was found hiding in one of his unrented apartments. He immediately got arrested for murdering his wife and assaulting the part-timer. After his arrest, the sauna baths were shut down, and the customers started to return to our restaurant slowly. I assured Hannah that I had so much faith in her that if she could turn this place into a success, she could do it anywhere. We saved enough money and took an even nicer place out on a down payment. Before moving the restaurant, we told everyone, and even put a board which said our restaurant has moved to a different location. Setting up and making the new place successful was not that hard. We managed to achieve this with hard work and support of each other. It has been 2 years now, and our business is more successful than ever. And I even realized that I have romantic feelings for Hannah. So wish me luck, guys, because I'm planning on confessing to her tonight. I'm a vegetarian living in Canada, and I know that even though I don't eat meat, I have to coexist with people who eat meat. Living in Canada, I've made many friends with different cultures, and it's been great hanging out around with all these amazing people. Some of them are vegetarian like me, some of them are non-vegetarian, some are vegan, while some of them are vegetarian only on particular days, such as Monday, Tuesday, or Saturday, etc. I know you must be wondering, why in the world am I telling you all this? Well, it's because of an incident related to Uber Eats that happened to me 2 months ago. It was past dinner time when my doorbell rang. I was having a milkshake, which I usually drink before going to bed. I put the glass on the kitchen counter and went to open the door. And when I did, I saw a delivery guy wearing an Uber uniform standing there with a package in his hands. "So your delivery from Uber Eats," he said while handing me the package. "Sorry, but I didn't order anything," I said while denying the package from his hands. "But sir, the address and the name of the nameplate are the same as a delivery address, and on top of that, your order is paid for as well." I hesitantly took the package when he said that, and checked in front of the delivery guy. "Are you vegetarian or vegan by any chance?" I asked the delivery guy while stopping him as he was leaving. "No sir, why are you asking?" he replied confusingly. "Can you take this for yourself then? I don't know if someone placed the wrong order, but I'm a vegetarian and there seemed to be a turkey sandwich inside of this package." After saying that, I gave the order to the delivery guy and closed the door. I thought that there were so many people living here, so it may have been possible that someone accidentally placed the wrong order. So I just went back to my room and fell asleep. The next day when I met up with my neighbors, I asked them if any of them had placed the wrong order last night, but all of them denied it. It felt a bit weird, but I did not pay much attention to it at the time. 2 days later, another wrong delivery guy from Uber Eats came with another wrong order. I checked and it was something non-vegetarian this time as well.
I gave it to the delivery guy again. There was no way that this was a coincidence that they had placed an order with the wrong name and address. But I thought maybe it was possible, and let's let this one slide as well. But the very next day, another wrong delivery arrived on my doorstep. At this rate, it doesn't seem like these orders were accidentally put. Instead, I could not understand what was going on. Was someone purposely sending me non-vegetarian dishes, knowing that I was a vegetarian? Even if someone did that, was it to offend me or something? I simply could not understand the reason behind that if someone was purposely doing this. The next day, a society meeting was being held, so I decided to raise this weird Uber Eats deliveries issue during the meeting because everyone would be present there. And if someone among them was purposely or accidentally doing this, then I would have a good talk with them. The next day, when I brought this up during the meeting, everyone's expression looked shocked, as if none of them had any idea about it. That was when Mrs. Wilson made a remark saying, "I wish I could get such wrong orders, then I wouldn't have to spend so much money on food." Everyone started laughing, but then looking at my expression, they apologized and said that they will provide any kind of help I need if it is bothering me this much. I knew they did not understand the situation because they were not going through it. But being a vegetarian and receiving such orders were quite offensive. And if it was someone else, they would have made quite a fuss over it by now. But I was letting it go until now, but not anymore. I received another order from Uber Eats that following night, and immediately I called the customer number support and informed them about all the wrong deliveries. But since I wasn't the one placing the delivery directly, they did not help me much. I had already decided that if I received even one more wrong order, I would find a complaint against it. So I immediately called 911 and told them about the entire set of incidents that had been occurring lately. The next day, I saw in the news that many vegan activists had disrupted many restaurants and people's meals who were selling or eating meat. I had seen several cases in the past, but never paid much attention to them until someone tried to do the same with me. I don't get why people have issues with others' food and eating choices when we simply can accept each other and coexist. Attacking others, trying to offend others with something they don't eat, and trying to cause disputes among others are just forms of terror that should be stopped at once. We all should live and let others live because we only have a few years remaining in our lives, and wouldn't it be better to spend it happily and positively among one another? I guess they took action against my complaint because I stopped getting those wrong orders. There was one more thing. I received a nice cheer-up gift from my friends who invited themselves to throw a party at my house, which felt good, to be honest. One thing that still lingers in my mind is that I never got to know the real person behind those orders. Was someone sending them on purpose? Or was it really a coincidence? And the wrong Uber Eats orders?
Poppies? For me? Really? Margaret squealed when she saw a bunch of bouquets of poppies surprisingly delivered to our door. It's not from me, honey. And who sent it at this hour? Is there a name on it? I was so surprised to see who was sending my girlfriend her favorite flowers. There's no name over it, she said. I went ahead and checked, but there was no name over it, and I thought maybe someone from her family may have sent it. Leave it, darling. Let's sleep now. I'm dying to embrace you in my arms, I said, while grabbing her waist and pulling her closer. But I'm craving chocolates. Can you bring them for me? She said while kissing mischievously on my nose. Don't we have them in our refrigerator? I asked, and she shook her head no. What other choice does a poor boyfriend have in this situation except for accepting his girl's command? I nodded and went near the rack to grab my jacket. I wore the jacket, picked up my car keys and wallet from the side table, and left the room. Before leaving for the store, I gave her a deep, passionate kiss, and then head out. I took out of the car and went inside. I noticed a different smell inside. I thought maybe Marge may have changed her perfume. I called Margaret Marge lovingly. But the scent was a bit stronger than what she usually wore, so it made me a bit uncomfortable. We had recently moved to this town, and the only store which used to be open 24 hours was the only 7-Eleven which was around the town, so I had to drive all the way there. And while I was driving, I saw the cashier of that store was going in the opposite direction of the store. The way he was taking was the same as my house. I thought maybe he lived around there too, and he must be going home for a shift. After about 20 minutes, I reached 7-Eleven and entered the store. I noticed the cashier who was there tonight was someone new, someone whose face I had never seen since the day I got into this town. Well, never mind. Who cares which cashier works at this hour? I just need to focus on buying snacks and heading home so that I can have sex with Marge. Maybe I should take some dotted condoms as well. She enjoys them. I was thinking that while shopping, and when I was done, I went ahead to the cashier counter. But to my surprise, the cashier was not there. I started waiting for him to come back, but 15 minutes passed and he did not return. I stood there waiting for another half an hour, but he still did not come back. So I decided to leave the cash at the counter, take the things, and go back. After doing exactly that, I exited the store. That was when I heard someone's muffled noise coming from the alley that was just beside 7-Eleven. I tiptoed and followed the voice and looked in the alley sneakily, and got shocked and terrified at what I saw. The new cashier, who looked thin and weak, was holding a muscular-looking man's arm, bending it behind him. The guy was in the same uniform as him. The muscular man's mouth was slit, and the cashier was holding a knife in his other hand, and he was continuously kicking him in the gut. As I was panicking, he turned and looked at me. I got scared and ran. But the weirdest thing happened to me. I blinked and noticed that I was inside the 7-Eleven store. I looked at the time, and it was the same as when I entered, and the cashier was sitting over the place on the cash counter looking normal. I guess I may have hallucinated or daydreamed, so I picked up the same things as before again and walked over to the cash counter to pay. But the cashier was not there this time either. I had a bad feeling in my guts, and I dropped the things there and slowly walked out of the store. That was when I heard the muffling sounds from earlier. I slowly walked to the all, hoping it would be different this time, but it wasn't. The cashier had just slit the mouth of the muscular man, and I was terrified as he turned and saw me, and I ran. But again, I blinked, and I was in the 7-Eleven store. I hesitantly checked the time, and it was again the same time as before when I'd gotten there. I was too scared to buy anything now, so I just quietly exited the store without buying anything and ran toward my car. After that, I quickly drove toward my house as fast as I can, and when I reached there, I noticed the bike of that old cashier whom I had saw on my way to 7-Eleven was parked outside my house. I thought something was wrong, because tonight just seemed bad to me, and I got worried about Marge. So I sneakily went inside the house without making any sound, and as soon as I reached inside, I heard a faint moaning sound that was coming from the bedroom upstairs. I wished what I was thinking to be wrong and quietly walked there. The door was half open, and what I saw there terrified me more than what I had seen earlier. My girlfriend was lying naked on the bed, and the old cashier was going down on her. Her moan was piercing not just my ears, but my heart as well. I was thankful for what happened at the store at this point, because I was able to see her real face by the time reversing the incident. I quietly went down to the kitchen without letting them realize that I was back and grabbed the sharpest knife that was there. After that, I went back up and sneakily went inside the bedroom. And as they were too busy focused on sex, I stabbed the guy multiple times in the back. Margaret had started to scream in terror, and after that guy was dead, I pulled her by her hair. For some reason, the scene from the 7-Eleven that I saw earlier flashed through my mind, and my hands started to move without my will. I had slit Margaret's mouth, and her eyes popped out from pain, terror, and shock. I did not want to do this, but my body was moving on its own, which was equally terrorizing to me as it must have been for her. Not only that, but I killed her without my will. I admit that I killed the guy because he was touching her, but no matter how wrong Margaret had done me, I would never kill her because I love her. I threw the knife and sat there. Both of their dead bodies were lying around, and I was in shock, thinking that no one would believe me if I say that I did not kill Margaret.
That day I had a bad headache and fever, so I slept for the entire day. And when I woke up, it was already evening time. The first thing I did was check my fever, and thankfully it had gone down. So I went over to the bathroom and washed off my fever sweat. And after that, I went directly to the kitchen because I don't know about any of you, but I felt extremely hungry every time I got a fever. As I walked into the kitchen and opened up the fridge, there was a cake on the bottom shelf with a Mario Kart character on it, along with a note. I did not need to see the note to know whom it came from, but I started sweating after seeing that Yoshi's picture over it, which is a character from Mario. I immediately took out my phone and checked the date. At the moment I saw it, I started shaking. I could not believe that it was 29th of February. All of a sudden, memories from 8 years ago started to come back to me, along with all the horrible emotions. I was 13 years old, and it was the day I won the talent contest. My dad gifted me the console with Mario Kart on it. I was so happy because I wanted it so badly for so long and just kept asking my parents to buy it for me. And then finally I had it. My parents had organized a little party for me and then invited my friends over as well. Everything was great. Food, games, everything. But I was still super eager to play with my newly gotten console. So I sat on the couch and started playing the game while other kids enjoyed the party. "Hey kid, hold your breaths. We have another surprise for you." It was my mom who came and announced this with a big smile on her face. So out of curiosity, I focused my attention on it. That was when someone with the Bowser costume came in with a butterscotch with chocolate mixed cake. My favorite. And it had the picture of one of my favorite characters on it, Yoshi. I jumped with excitement and went ahead to take the cake from that person's hand. But as I was about to grab it, that person pulled it away from me and said, "Not so fast, kiddo. Not until Bowser feels like it." It was a man's voice. My mom started laughing as she thought it was some kind of funny act, and the other kids started cheering and laughing too. But that wasn't the case with me. I was feeling embarrassed because not only was that guy not allowing me to touch my cake, but he also made everyone laugh at me. So I decided not to touch or eat that cake anymore, and I was pretty stubborn about it. I took my console and started playing with it. While playing the game, I glanced over to the side where the man was entertaining the other children every once in a while, and every single time I found him glaring in my direction. It wasn't like he had put the cake down so that someone else can eat. Instead, he was still holding it on, which made me feel very frustrated and angry at the guy. I could not believe him. It was my party, and I wasn't able to get what I wanted. I was feeling so grumpy that I was even rude to the kids who tried to approach me and play with me, which I still feel awful about. Anyway, I was sitting on the couch playing with the console, and then about an hour had passed or so since the guy had arrived. He suddenly stood up and asked others for their attention. I turned my head over towards him to see what other act he would perform, and his gaze was still on me. That was when he announced that it was the final cake cutting time and asked me to come over to cut the cake. Everyone started looking over in my direction, but I was still feeling humiliated from earlier and so pissed that I turned my attention to the console again, completely ignoring him. He called out for me again while awkwardly laughing, but I still did not respond. At this point, other kids started to call my name as well, just so that I can come over and cut the cake. But I told you earlier, I was pretty stubborn about not touching or eating the cake at the time. I was playing Mario Kart, completely ignoring them. I heard footsteps approaching me, so I turned my head over, only to meet my eyes with Bowser's eyes, which kind of freaked me out. He said with a pretty annoyed voice while gritting his teeth, "Cut the cake, kid." I looked into his eyes for a few moments, and then stood up and walked towards the other snacks. He knew that I ignored him, which I could tell that pissed him off. But he was still in my house, performing for my party, and my parents were here too. So there was nothing he could do about it. That's what I thought at the moment, at least, while stuffing some nachos in my mouth. The children started to get annoyed too, and a commotion started on its own while they started saying names to me. My parents heard the noises coming, and thinking something was wrong, they went downstairs to see what was going on. And as they got down, one of the kids told them that I was being rude and ignoring the cake cutting. I could not believe how everyone was making it look like it was my fault, while it was the fault of the guy who was wearing the Bowser costume. My anger went off the chart when my parents started to scold me in front of everyone while saying that I should apologize to the man and then cut the cake. I got so frustrated and angry that I walked to the guy and took the cake from his hands and threw it right into his face. Just a moment later, as I saw the man's eyes, I regretted doing that. His red eyes met with mine, which I instantly felt was filled with anger and so much malice in it. My parents immediately went to him and started apologizing while scolding me all together, but he was not saying anything. Instead, he just kept glaring at me. Mom felt that something was off with the man, and that he was angry and embarrassed, so she stomped on me and gave me one tight slap. "Is that how I taught you to behave with guests? Go to your room right now, young man, and reflect on your actions." After she scolded me, I started walking upstairs. I looked back to see my mom, who was handing him some cash, while the man just kept glaring at me. I felt a chill down my spine and ran over to my room in an instant. The same night, I woke up thirsty in my room, so I went to the kitchen. But when I opened the refrigerator, there was a cake which looked the same as the one that I threw in the guy's face. I took out the cake and cut it with a knife. Red liquid started to flow from the cake, which had a really weird smell. As I took out a piece of the cake, a finger fell on the floor, which was inside the cake. I freaked out and started screaming while my parents came to the kitchen as well. "What is it, honey?" It was my mom who came towards me while rubbing her eyes, and as she saw me curled up on the floor, she rushed over. The moment she saw the cake with the blood, she freaked out as well. But my dad was acting calm. He said it must be some kind of prank by one of the kids and then just threw it in the trash. Dad cleaned the floor and we all went upstairs. I found the note fallen near the refrigerator, which I picked up. After reaching my room, I unfolded the note and felt terror-stricken after reading it. It said, "You would receive this cake on this very date until the day you finally eat it. Signed, Bowser."
From the mid-1980s to the early 1990s, the rural South Korean city of Hwasong was terrorized by a merciless and predatory serial killer. Between September of 1986 and April of 1991, a total of 15 women and girls were found bound, gagged, violated, and in most cases, strangled to death with an item of their own clothing, usually their socks, underwear, or pantyhose. The murders prompted the largest criminal investigation in South Korean history, with over 20 million man-hours spent poring over witness statements, analyzing crime scenes, and interviewing over 21,000 suspected culprits. The nightmare began on September 15th of 1986, when a 71-year-old woman named Lee Won-im disappeared while returning home from visiting her daughter. 4 days later, her family's worst fears were confirmed when her body was found dumped on some nearby farmland. Just over a month later, 25-year-old Park Yun-suk vanished after a bus ride back from Songtan. Her body was found just 2 days later, naked and strangled, floating in a local canal. The murders continued month after month for years. Always the same type of victim, always murdered in the same way. It was quite clear that Hwasong had a dangerous and determined serial killer on their hands. The only trouble was, how would they go about catching him? The Hwasong murders are notorious all over South Korea for being the country's first modern serial killer, especially in the sense that a particular modus operandi was applied to all known victims. However, the investigation was so intense and far-reaching that, after just a month's worth of police work, the list of suspects had grown to include a mind-boggling 21,000 different people. On top of that, a whopping 40,000 people had their fingerprints taken, but the true list of suspects could potentially be narrowed down to the few hundred that actually had DNA samples taken from them. Even shorter is the list who had hair samples taken, which is down to a mere 180 different people. Given that the murders had occurred all within a 4-mile radius of downtown Hwaseong, hundreds of pairs of police officers and volunteers were positioned within just 100 meters of one another. Their job was to patrol the surrounding area, keeping an eye out for anyone suspicious. But the killer simply worked out where police presence thinned out and attacked there instead. It seemed that not only were the police unable to prevent the killer from striking again, but the killer himself was unable to resist the urge to hunt and to kill. The first big breakthrough came in September of 1988, when police were able to commission a composite sketch of the suspect, one based on the witness statements of a bus driver and his conductor. He was wiry, a shorter man, aged between 24 and 28 years old, with a sharp nose and short cropped hair. Some victims also described him as having soft hands, which suggested he had a mostly sedentary occupation, possibly as an office or textile worker. This description was corroborated with existing carnal assault reports, and the conclusion was chilling. Their suspect had been engaged in venal, predatory activity for almost a decade prior to killing for the first time, and it became apparent that South Korean police were dealing with one of the most fiendish and prolific criminals in the country's short history. It also appeared that the killer had a bizarre fixation which influenced not only his choice of victims, but also the timing of his attacks. It was noted that the killer's victims had been women wearing red clothing, and that they had been targeted on rainy days. This led some female police officers to set traps for him, walking alone in the greater Hwaseong area on rainy days while wearing items of red clothing. Yet it seemed the killer was wise to their ruse and avoided them altogether. The next major breakthrough came on July 27th of 1989, when analysis of a single hair found at one of the crime scenes led to the arrest of a 22-year-old male by the name of Yoon Sung-yao. Yet it was later revealed that this murder was totally unrelated to the others, and as positive as it was that police had caught themselves a murderer, the red clothing-obsessed serial killer was still on the loose, and the attempts to link all previous murders to their one suspect had arguably set the investigation back by years. Not only that, but it was later alleged that South Korean police had brutally beaten and tortured Yoon in their attempts to get a confession out of him. This meant that much of the evidence gained from his interrogations was completely inadmissible, and this caused a huge scandal with the South Korean police force. So much so that in December of 2019, police arrested 8 of the original investigators, charging them with falsifying documents, illegal detention, and physically abusing Yoon when he was in custody. It also became apparent that at least 4 possible suspects actually went so far as to take their own lives as a result of alleged police harassment. So, to say the police mishandled the case would be a grotesque understatement indeed. On the night of September 26, 1989, while the police were still investigating the Hwaseong serial killer, a home invasion occurred in the city of Suwon, just 13 miles from Hwaseong. The homeowner happened to be awake and confronted the armed burglar before calling the police. The man was arrested, identifying himself as Lee Chun-jae when questioned, and after a short trial in February of 1990, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. Lee Chun-jae ended up being released after just 6 months, after an appeal hearing in which he claimed to have been the one who was attacked, and he'd simply run into the residence to seek shelter. Yet during those 6 months, something interesting happened. There was not a single new murder that could be attributed to the Hwaseong serial killer. Then just a few months after Lee Chun-jae's release, a 14-year-old girl was murdered whilst walking home from school on a rainy day, with investigators quick to note that she was carrying a red backpack. The killer was right under the noses of hundreds of homicide detectives working on the case, yet they failed to make any connections between Lee's imprisonment and the murderer's apparent hiatus. Lee Chun-jae remained quiet for a number of years, minimizing his murderous activities in the face of increasing police pressure. Yet in December of 1993, Lee Chun-jae's wife filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. She was appalled by his prison sentence and Notice how he'd become increasingly withdrawn over the years that preceded his conviction. Little did she know, her husband had been the very same murderous psychopath that had been terrorizing the Hwasong area, and leaving him would only cause the cauldron of evil inside of him to violently boil over. On January 13th of the following year, Lee Chun-jae contacted his 18-year-old sister-in-law, explaining that his soon-to-be ex-wife had forgotten a handful of her belongings. When his sister-in-law turned up to collect them, Lee Chun-jae dragged her inside, brutally violated her, then strangled the life from her. Then, in a sick display of false compassion, he approached his heartbroken father-in-law to offer his help in the search. It's truly horrifying to think that, despite his words, Lee Chun-jae was only there to soak up the family's suffering, to revel in the destruction and anguish he had wrought. Yet in the days that followed, police noted that on multiple occasions, Lee Chun-jae seemed to suggest that his sister-in-law had been abducted and murdered. This was before investigators had any inkling whatsoever of her fate, so the fact that he was so adamant on her abduction was highly suspicious. Lee Chun-jae was also heard to ask, "How many years in prison do you serve for violating someone and murder?" And it didn't take long until the police investigation was focused solely on him. Eventually, on January 18th of 1994, Lee Chun-jae was arrested as the prime suspect in his sister-in-law's murder, and although he initially denied all involvement, he was convicted and sentenced to death in May of the same year. Again, upon his imprisonment, the Hwasong serial killer apparently ceased to operate, but it would take 25 more years for them to connect the dots and realize that Lee Chun-jae was the monster that they had been looking for all along. On September 18th of 2019, South Korean police official announced that Lee Chun-jae was most likely the Hwasong serial killer. This is based on a DNA match taken from the underwear of one of the victims, and other evidence linked him to almost all of the others. All the police needed to do was coax a confession out of him, and given that he was already detained at Busan prison for the murder of his sister-in-law, investigators had direct, round-the-clock access to the man. It then just took over 2 weeks, but in early October, Lee Chun-jae confessed to killing 14 women and girls over a 6-year period. He also confessed to almost 30 carnal assaults, along with almost 100 attempted assaults that matched up with a number of unsolved reports. Psychologists noted that Lee displayed psychopathic tendencies by being unable to empathize with the victim's pain and suffering, and continuously showing off his crimes. One particularly remarkable aspect of this case is that before it was even solved, it became the basis for a popular South Korean movie directed by Bong Joon-ho, the same guy who directed the Academy Award-winning black comedy Parasite. Song Kang-ho and Kim Sang-kyung star as Detective Park and Detective So, respectively, 2 of the detectives trying to solve the crime, and the film ends with Detective Park looking straight at the camera, trying to spot the killer amongst the audience by using a special eye contact method. Obviously, it implied that the killer was still out there, maybe even watching the film among the audience in question, and audiences were terrified by such a realistic prospect. Fortunately for them, Lee Chun-jae was in prison for the murder of his sister-in-law, meaning moviegoers were safe from his predatory advances. But it definitely speaks to the morbid fascination society has with serial killers, how a horrifying series of murders can so fascinate us that we'll seek to glamorize and serialize it before the killer is even caught. This happened a few months ago to my friends and I. We are university students in Cape Town, South Africa, so when we aren't trying to just get through the semester, we like to let our habits get the better of us and go out for drinks. On this night, we had just finished what felt like an extra long day at university and decided to head to a bar about 5 minutes from campus for some much-needed stress relief. The evening was going well, although a bit slow. It was enjoyable with everyone having a drink and getting a bit restless. So me being one of the more outgoing ones in the group, I suggested we head to the pool bar not far from where we were. Everyone agrees and we get our stuff to go. We all jump in my car and we get to the bar, but being a Thursday night, parking was a bit scarce. I finally managed to find a spot about a block away from the bar, but in a secluded side street. I should also mention that this bar is in one of the sketchier parts of town, but is normally quite safe due to the amount of nightlife associated with being so close to a university. We walked to the bar and no one really felt uneasy, nor did anything happen to make us feel that way, which was quite surprising. After a few hours of some pool and just relaxing, we decided it was time to go grab some dinner before restaurants close, as being in South Africa means that most restaurants, even fast food, close really early at around 7 or 8 p.m. to comply with the curfew. We decided to stop at the pizza place below the bar to grab some food before we all decided what the plan was for the end of the night. So because our group was so large and the pizza place being so small, we decided to have those getting food go inside while the others who didn't would just wait outside on the street. This was an easy decision as the pizza place had a massive open window with built-on counter, so we could still all talk to each other. This is where things started getting a little weird. While we were waiting for our friends inside the pizza place to come out, this massive white van pulls up past us and stops. The driver wasn't an intimidating-looking dude. He was skinny, looked to be about average height with shoulder-length blonde hair. A pretty standard-looking dude for the kind of area we were in. He calls me and asks me if I think his van could fit in a parking spot just behind him. For perspective, this parking spot could probably fit like a small hatchback, maybe. This dude is driving a full long-sized panel van. This makes me kind of uneasy as I thought that as a driver of a car, you should know where your car can definitely not fit, and this is one of them. I explained to him that I didn't think it was even worth attempting. He responds by telling me that he has faith in his ability and I should come stand behind the van and direct him in. This gives me major red flags, and after a few back and forths, he just pulls the emergency brake up and sits and stares at my friends and I for what felt like an eternity. He then thanked us and drove off. This sparks my friends to come outside from the pizza place as they just saw what happened and were very confused. We all were kind of weirded out, but think nothing of it, and everyone gets their pizza, and we try to decide what the plan is for the last hour or two we have before curfew cuts things short. Most of us decide this is where our night is probably going to end, as we're all kind of weirded out by the guy in the van. A few others decide that they were going to stay and just Uber home a little later in the evening. With our group number cut down to 4, we decided to walk back to the car and just head home. When we left the pizza place, a homeless person called at us and was insisting we had nothing to worry about with the guy in the van, which didn't help with anyone's nerves. We then decided to head to the car, but as soon as we turned the corner to approach the side street where the car was parked, we see Van Man again. This time, not so happy as he seemed in his encounter earlier. I made a cheeky comment about him finally finding a parking spot so he could fit in while we were walking past each other, and he just stared at my friends and I, not breaking eye contact even when we passed him. I turned around to see if he was still looking. He was, but as we turned the corner of the side street with the car, I saw it and my heart sank. The van, horribly parked half on and half off the sidewalk, back door slightly open. Upon seeing this, I turn around and see Van Man is now walking towards us, but he said something that confused me at first, but immediately made sense after. He said, "Hey, please just watch my car." Which confused me, but when he said that, 4 men sat up from leaning on the wall next to it and began following us. My friends and I were slightly ahead of them, so we were trying to discuss the game plan because it was obvious if we did nothing, something horrible was going to happen. My friends start walking faster and I remain at the same speed, frantically searching my pockets for my car keys, all the while shouting at my friends to wait up and asking what the rush was. All this was in hopes that the guys behind us, who were gaining on us at that point, were oblivious to us knowing that they had sinister intentions. As soon as the car came into view, we booked it, jumped in and drove away. But we were only mere seconds from not being that lucky. After locking the car doors, I saw the men surrounding the car. I managed to get us out, and looking back in the mirror, I saw a 5th man by the van at the bottom of the street. I still have no idea what their intentions were that night, if it were to rob us, or just beat us up, or worse. I don't really like to think about it, and really do consider how lucky we were that night. I ask that when you're out, no matter how innocent an interaction with someone can seem, always pay attention to the little things.
This happened back in 1989, and the story involves my stepdad, dad, biological dad, Donald Duck, and my sister, Sis. The person who exacted the revenge has passed now, so it should be safe to relate. And this is a revenge story that would warrant prison time, I believe. I was living outside the country when it happened, so my sister relayed all this information to me about a year after, and we recently got together and went over the events again. So my biological parents married when they were very young, and Donald Duck was still in law school. The marriage lasted long enough to produce 2 children. They didn't waste time in those days. My sister, who was 14 months, my elder, and myself. They were divorced before I was born. And Donald was a serial cheater, a pathological liar, and a total asshole. He still is at least a liar and an AR. He's in his mid-70s now, so maybe not doing much cheating anymore, but the fact that he is still working as a lawyer, I think has indicated that he was never a good one, and he doesn't have enough to retire. I've looked at reviews on him online, and it's funny to see that most reviewers say that he is not only a terrible lawyer, but a horrible person. When Sis was 22, she was a single mother, and my nephew, her son, was around 3. Her company transferred her to another state, and she discovered that Donald Duck lived in a town near her new work location, and thought that he might be able to help her get out of bearings in a new place. For a short time when we were teenagers, we had some sporadic involvements in our lives after moving to a neighboring city. It was mostly him trying to impress us with how cool and rich he thought we should think he was. So though it has been a few years since she had seen him, it was not like they were strangers. In any case, Donald Duck agreed to let Sis move into his apartment with him, his girlfriend at the time, of course. Many years his junior, and her 9-month-old child, not Donald's, until she was able to find her place. He also offered to allow her to keep her belongings in his storage unit. Says took him up on his offer. Never did Donald Duck make any reference to being paid for the use of the storage unit or paying for utilities at the apartment. Says stayed for 3 months and did her best to get out as quickly as she could. And as far as she could once, she became more familiar with the area. Living with him was hard. Did I mention he was an asshole? And her young son would find his pregnant lady porno mags around the apartment. This is pre-internet. Mr. Duck's young girlfriend was able to help with babysitting, something Sis paid her for. Eventually, she got her apartment. But all of her things, her son's toys, her furniture, household items, and everything. But her bed was still in the storage unit. So she called him to figure out how she could get her things back. But he seemed to want to hang on to them for some reason. He said, "You are my girlfriend's money for babysitting, and you can't get your things back until you pay her." She said, "Have you talked to her?" "I've paid her everything I owed her." He put down the phone and talked to his girlfriend, and she confirmed that she had been paid. And then he said, "Well, you owe 1/3 of the utilities for the time you were here." She reminded them that he had never said anything about that. So he got a little heated, and she was feeling desperate and angry. She then shouted an accusation of something he did to her when she was very young, which is a different story. And he responded, "Have you ever told anyone that?" "No," she said. "If you ever do, I will break your neck," he said. And the conversation ended there. She had given up and thought she would never see her things again. When about 20 minutes later, she got a call from an acquaintance who had gone on 1 or 2 dates with Donald before she met my sister. She told Sis that Mr. Duck just called her, asking if Sis had ever told her anything he might have done to Sis, hinting at the accusation Sis had made since I had never told anyone and The acquaintance told Donald as much as later calls my stepdad, whom we have always is considered to be our dad. And he was the only father we knew growing up, as he was in the picture before we were old enough to remember. He married my mom when I was an infant, and my sister a toddler, and they were together for many years until my mom's death. The guy's had a lot of faults. He passed away in 2017, and we often felt better when he wasn't around. But he tried. It's not easy raising someone else's kids. He was our dad as far as we were concerned, and he'd legally adopted us. He had a lot of issues, but he hated to see anyone being taken advantage of if they were in a weaker position. In other words, he hated a bully, and Donald Duck was being a bully. When I was in the first grade, I rode a school bus with middle and high school students. There were a couple of kids who would bully me, and when he found out, he confronted the bullies and dads, and it ended. Another time, I was in third grade and driving somewhere with him in his pickup around town, and he saw two young teenagers destroying a bicycle that he assumed they had stolen. He stopped and confronted them with his big framing hammer. Years later, he broke my mom out of a mental institution by threatening the director or some doctor, I'm not sure, with that same hammer. Yes, we were a fun family. Anyway, when Sis called him explaining that Donald Duck was holding all of her possessions hostage, she didn't know what to do. He told her that he knew several crisps who would be happy to rough him up and wouldn't even want to be paid. They would just do it for the fun. He was very bothered that Donald was keeping his grandson's things from him and wanted to hurt Mr. Duck. But Sis declined his offer. Then he asked her, what is the thing he values most in the world? His car. She said his car at that point was a Porsche. He had purchased new just a few years before. It wasn't quite the absolute entry-level model, but pretty close. Of course, he had all kinds of arguments about why it was better than more expensive ones, and obviously it was red. Dad was trying to come up with a way to not only get revenge, but to scare Mr. Duck enough to force him to give Sis back her things. She said she was fine with whatever he wanted to do if it got her belongings back, but wanted to make sure none of it could be traced back to her. So nothing happened until about a month later, and Donald Duck called Sis out of the blue as if nothing had happened and asked, hey, when would you like to come get your things? How about this Saturday? He had some change of heart that is unexplained to this day. So she said, sure. She didn't trust him. So she didn't want to go alone. She was able to get a male friend to go with her, and she got a U-Haul, picked up her stuff, and got out. That very same evening, she tried several times to call Dad to let him know that she got her things back, and all was well. No need for any drastic measures. But it was too late. The wheels had been set in motion. He never answered the phone. Remember, these are pre-cell phone days, so when you're not at home, you don't answer. Sis called Mom, who was living separately from Dad for a time. It's complicated, and told her she couldn't reach Dad. Mom said Dad was sick, and that's probably why he wasn't answering his phone. But then at 10:30 p.m., Sis got a call from Donald's girlfriend who asked her, what are you doing? I'm at home in bed. Why? She said someone just blew up Donald's car. My sister's heart dropped. She knew who did it. The police asked Donald who would want to do this to him, and he says his name. So she now becomes suspect number 1. Sis asked their girlfriend if Donald was scared, and girlfriend said yes. They were spending the night in a hotel. Fortunately, the call from my girlfriend to Sis, just a few minutes after the explosion, gave us her alibi. Sis lived over 30 minutes away and couldn't have answered her home phone if she had been the one to ignite the bomb. But the bomb did its job well. It had turned the Porsche into an unrecognizable wreck, took out the adjacent car, and destroyed many feet of the carport above both cars. I'm guessing the tank in a Porsche was nearly full. Just after Sis got off the phone,
She called Mom, telling her that someone blew up Mr. Duck's car, and she thinks it was Dad. While she was on the phone with Mom, another call came in, and it was Dad. He said mysteriously, "There's a box outside your door. Bring it in. You never talk to me tonight." Sis was a little afraid to open the box, but it turned out just to be some of her son's items that he had left with his grandpa's clothes and toys. Months later at Christmas, Sis asked Dad about it and he confessed. Turned out he was very sick physically when he pulled that stunt. Sis was touched that he would go through so much effort and risk jail time for her, all while being ill. She asked him if he was scared of driving back, and he said yes, and that every headlight behind him he took to be a cop until he reached the state line. Sis found out from their girlfriend that the cop said the job was very amateur. Certainly not the work of a professional, but hey, it did the job. That Todd said he had asked a coworker who was once a member of the aforementioned Crisps about how to make a car bomb, and she instructed him. He always did love blowing things up. When I was 13, we bonded over crumpling up the old colored sparklers into powder. I don't think they make the colored ones anymore, but they burned hotter, and we funneled the powder into the spent CO2 cart used, and making bombs powerful enough to blow up those old metal milk cans that hold a few gallons. We did this for the 4th of July. Anyway, Sis said it was some sort of Molotov cocktail stuffed in the tailpipe, but I'm not sure how that would work. My idea of a Molotov cocktail is a 750 milliliter size bottle like a wine bottle or a fifth of booze, which would not fit into the tailpipe of a 4-cylinder Porsche. I'm guessing the diameter is no more than 2 inches? Not big enough to fit such a bottle. Maybe he used a similar bottle or simply a smaller container of some kind filled with something very ignitable. I truly regret not discussing it with him. But we weren't close since I left home. If you didn't need him, he had a hard time having a relationship with you. Plus, I was married to a woman for many years who kept me from my parents and siblings, so I don't have better details. Thank God that 25-year marriage is over, and my current wife loves my family. One hilarious detail. Donald Duck continued to father offspring and date very young women. His current wife is my age, exactly, and he has a daughter many years younger than my youngest child. A couple of years ago, I had a conversation with one of these half-sisters, and she's a marvelous person despite half her DNA. Her mother was never married to Donald, and this sister is the age of my youngest daughter. I told her the story of the exploded Porsche, and she found it very amusing, because she said Donald loves to tell a story about he was prosecuting some mob boss and a couple of thugs came to his door trying to threaten him. Of course, being the big, bad, brave man he is, he didn't back down. And what was his reward? Those thugs blew up his car. I think it's hilarious that he tells this story to his children. But now they know the truth. He's the biggest bullshitter I've ever met. Also, due to Donald's allegations that it was my sister who blew up his car, the condo association or whatever tried to sue my sister for the damage to the carport. But it came to nothing. They were grasping at straws because there was no evidence, of course. But it did scare them and cause her some anxiety. They said at an early age that something was very wrong with me. I was not showing the usual cognitive behavior like all the other children. They were worried that I would end up like all the other people in the institution, and they were scared for me. Though I think they were scared of me, of the things that I could do and all the pain that I could cause people. And it gave them an excuse to treat me harshly, like I cannot feel pain. But it got them nothing. I was 5 when I first strangled a puppy to death. I started killing pets of my neighbor by the time I was 8. And by the time I was 9, I did my very first killing, my very first double murder. It was my parents. I shot them both, 6 times, 3 fathers and 3 mothers. I staged the murder as if they killed each other. The murders were easy.
I had to actually shoot myself in the hand to look like a victim. Can you believe a 9-year-old shooting himself in his hand just to prove that he was the victim? It was very painful to shoot myself, but all of this was easier than acting as I cared. I walked free, though they circled me through foster homes. It's funny, one of the foster homes they sent me to was of Claudia. Claudia was 66 with stage 4 cancer of the throat, and she smoked too much. I remember giving her the last cigarette of her life. They always assumed that it was cancer that got her. By the time I was 15, I had already killed numerous animals, a countless number of puppies, and not many people though, except Claudia, my parents, and the old man who used to live down the street from Claudia. I actually enjoyed the company of that old man, but what I enjoyed even more was pushing him down the stairs. I was really hoping to drag him up and then make him fall again. But he hit his head in the first go and started bleeding really bad. It was 5 p.m. and it was a Sunday evening. There was this weird German guy singing really loudly. Now when I think back, I think it was Mozart maybe. I remember asking the old man as he was dying if he had any jazz, but he kept insisting me call the doctor. He wanted me to call a doctor while he was bleeding. I chuckled and said, "Why would I call a doctor? I'm trying to kill you, you silly goose." He looked at me in horror. He was so scared. He looked at the picture of his 5-year-old grandson, and I could see a tear in his left eye. I looked at the picture, and I could myself in it. I was 5 when I started strangled. I felt like I was missing something. As the old man was about to die, I held his hand and said, "I was 5 when I killed a puppy. It's been 10 years. Your grandson seems innocent. Seems like you are a man of God. If you meet him, tell him that I'm going to murder your grandson. I'm going to take his eyes out of his little skull. Tell that to God." There was this insane horror the old man felt. I scared him. And in the face of death, I was the one that scared the old man. So my to-do list was done. As the old man died, I decided to call in for help and then rung up his family and told him about this untimely, unfortunate death. I was hoping they would come to his wake and I would finally kill his little innocent grandson. But turns out, they were too busy to make the trip. So they asked me if I can do them this great favor and bring the casket to them in New York. They would pay me for the trip and do all the necessary processes in order. I said yes. I was a bit furious. I would have loved to kill the boy in the place I was familiar with, but that's okay. I can make things work. They sent me the tickets. Now I knew that I cannot possibly take any of the tools on the plane, so I would have to buy them in New York itself. I was excited about murdering his grandson and was counting down the days to it. I boarded the Atlanta Airlines, the 6-hour journey. I went in on the flight and there were at least 20 people on it, and mostly these elders, the old people. I looked at them and all I wanted to do was stomp their head in. But I couldn't do it in this plane. I had this insane rush and an instant urge to kill them all, to kill every single person on that plane. I couldn't possibly do it, but the rush and the rage were burning me on the inside, and I had to act upon it. Now, I had no initial plan on how to do it, but I had to. I just can't control these urges of extreme violence. But then there's the mission that I set myself upon. But the urge was too strong, and the only thing that seemed plausible to me was if everyone died on the plane. And the only way to do that was to hijack the plane. But it would mean going down with them. But I had this obsession with his grandson, and I really wanted to kill him more than anything in the world. I had to kill someone. So I decided to do this hefty trick that I did not know would work. I went to the aisle of the flight attendant and told her that I was facing problems at my seat and I want to change it to somewhere in the back. That is when she made me sit with a nice old lady who was dozing off as the flight was busy reaching its destination. After thinking for quite a lot of minutes, I pressed her nose with the tip of my fingers to cut her air, and she gasped for it. I took the neck pillow and pressed her face with it. Now I quietly got up from my seat and moved behind to the other, and as I did that, I kept strangling until she stopped moving. She seemed pretty dead. I wasn't sure though. I rummaged through her handbag she was holding and found that she had quite a bit of morphine in her bag. Along came an idea. I decided to sneak the morphine into all the drinks that were being served. So I took my chances and did that. After doing that, I quickly saw these old people fainting away, and all now I needed to do was slowly suffocate them. The flight attendants or the crew had no idea as to what was going on. One by one, every single one of the passengers was drifting into a state of slumber, but there were some who hadn't drank the water, so some were still quite awake, and killing with few of them still awake was still risky. I moved on and suffocated 3. Only 3 that I could do without getting noticed, because the flight attendant was noticing that there was something odd with the passenger at the seat in front. They were not waking up when the attendant told them to fasten their seatbelt as the plane was about to land, and there was a state of panic throughout the passengers when one of the passengers informed that the passenger beside him is also not waking up. And then I stood up and did the same for the passenger that I had killed, and to be 15 was a blessing. They took me to the side and upgraded me to another class, thinking that this could be dramatic for me. So as the plane landed, I had no idea that how much damage had I done. Foul play was suggested, and the Homeland Security launched an investigation. Everyone in that class was questioned, except me. I was upgraded to another class, and well, that was it. I reached the house of the old man and met with everyone. They treated me with so much warmth and love. Then I met his grandson, and there was it the moment. But surprisingly, the urge to kill him was not there. I was very much moved by the family and the love they were giving me, knowing that I had no one to look out for. They invited me to stay with them for a while, and well, I stayed. Turns out that 12 people died due to an overdose of morphine, and 20 people drank that overdose of water. A sense of fulfillment came to me, and then at that moment, I decided not to kill anyone anymore. I started repressing the urge to kill the old man's grandson, and instead took care of him like a big brother.
The morning of September 23, 1904 was marked by gray, ominous clouds that blanketed the skies of Cincinnati, Ohio. And it was raining at around 10:15 a.m. when the principal of Pleasant Ridge School, Thomas L. Zimmerman, rang the bell for morning recess. Zimmerman figured a little rain wouldn't do the children any harm, as they scattered into groups and began games of baseball and partook in general tomfoolery. But the principal had seriously misjudged how fast and how strong the rain would come. And not just the rain either. A full-on storm was quickly approaching. A few minutes later, the wind picked up while a heavy rain began to fall on the schoolyard. Most of the children ran for the school building to save themselves from being soaked through, but a group of about 30 young girls made a break for the outhouse on the opposite side of the schoolyard. The outhouse was a 10-foot square framed building positioned over a 12-foot deep stone vault on the eastern side of the schoolyard. It was only 11 years old, but had to be repaired several times because of shoddy construction. It was designed for maybe only a handful of students at any one time, but on that day, just over 30 young girls were trying to squeeze into the cramped, dank space. Suddenly, and without warning, the floor on one side of the building, rotten from years of moisture, gave way, and the entire floor of the privy crashed to the bottom of the vault, taking all 30 or so of the terrified young women with it. The floor fell almost 8 feet vertically and completely shattered, sending children as young as 7 into a huge pool of sewage water that was around 4 feet deep. There was no crash at all, 12-year-old Elsie Ferguson later said. There was no noise whatsoever, the floor just fell. That's all there was to it. Not a child scream that I'd heard. I felt the floor going and jumped quickly, clutching to the side of the door. I was left hanging on it, and with all my strength I pulled myself up and out of that place. A handful of the other girls managed to escape the same way, climbing up onto the toilet seat to make room for the others before making it to a doorway. But not all were so fortunate. Raw panic ensued, and the tragic accident quickly became a battle for their lives. The girls were unwittingly pitted against each other in a struggle for survival as they tried to climb out of the 4-foot-deep pool of human excrement, with the weaker girls crushed down by the stronger peers as they were forced under to drown in the mass of filth. You see, a mass drowning is perhaps one of the darkest, most horrifying things a person can experience, because during a panic like that, survival mechanics in the human brain kick in, and a person will find any kind of leverage at all to stay above water. This means that people will literally drag each other underwater, climbing atop each other's drowning bodies in order to stay afloat in breathing air. And this is exactly what happened during the tragedy that day. Girls were actually drowning each other in a desperate bid to stay alive. A young woman by the name of Lorena Ferguson was rushing into the outhouse just moments after the floor gave way, stopping dead in her tracks when she saw the horrific scene below. Seconds later, she turned on her heels and ran back into the schoolhouse to fetch help. A few minutes later, 2 of the girls ran into the room and exclaimed that a girl had fallen into the vault. Principal Zimmerman later told a local newspaper, "I didn't realize the awful calamity that had overcome us, but hurried in the direction of the outbuilding. On the way, I met a number of others. They were screaming wildly at the top of their voices, and it was some time before one of them could compose herself sufficiently to explain what had happened. Another young woman ran to one of the high school classrooms, which was still in session, and alerted one of the teachers there of the outhouse's collapse. Then she and 4 high school boys bolted toward the outhouse, arriving at roughly the same time as Principal Zimmerman, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to discover. The sight of terrified young women scrambling up the walls of the collapsed outhouse, covered in human filth, was almost too much to bear. Others further down were literally swimming in week-old fecal matter, struggling to keep their head above the mass of excrement. The sight alone was bad enough, but the cacophony of screams was almost deafening. All of the girls were screeching at the top of their lungs, their cries intermittent with the sounds of gagging and retching. 2 young men were across the street in the Presbyterian church with a few others when they heard the terrified screeching of the girls running away from the outhouse in the pouring rain. As they exited the church to see what all the commotion was about, they began to hear the faint screams of the girls trapped in the vault beneath the outhouse. They heard the desperate screams of "Mama, Papa, help us." Then, without as much as a word between them, the occupants of the church ran out into the rain and over to the girls' outhouse. There they found Principal Zimmerman, standing in a narrow doorway to the outhouse, looking half mad with anguish, pale with panic and unsure what to do. The men shoved him aside and got to work. They began calling out to any nearby to fetch ropes and ladders, anything that could help them fish the girls out from the pile of human waste. Zimmerman himself dropped to the ground near the open doorway, trying as best he could to reach some of the girls with just his arm, but it was impossible. They were way out of reach. Then some of the men who ran to help grabbed him by the legs, and lowered him further down into the recess. This helped him rescue 3 of the girls before any rescue equipment even arrived, and probably saved the man a lifetime of guilt in the process, given that he had panicked so awfully in the initial stages of the rescue attempt. Especially given that the step ladders brought over for the school were far too short, and the ropes brought over were nothing but clotheslines which snapped uselessly as the girls attempted to climb up them. While I was waiting for a longer ladder, Zimmerman later said, I begged the children to be quiet and brave, and I would rescue them. Some of the older girls followed his commands, attempted to calm the younger ones, but it was no good. Panic had well and truly taken hold. The ladders and clotheslines repeatedly failed, and the rescuers were forced to rethink their strategy. Using quick thinking, one of the men climbed into the steeple of the nearby church and unfurled the rope off the church bell. This was much more effective a tool and helped save the lives of 2 more of the girls. Another one of the rescuers found a long ladder in a nearby barn and helped Principal Zimmerman dip it into the muck. It was not long enough to reach all the way from the bottom of the vault, but it was long enough for Zimmerman and some of the other men to descend and lift the girls out of the mess. The girls that were pulled out of the mess were almost unrecognizable. Their eyes clenched tightly shut as they wept hysterically, gasping for breath and trying to uselessly clean the stinking waste off themselves. The struggle down there was terrible, said a survivor named Hazel Senior in the aftermath of the disaster. As long as I could get out of the water and take a breath of air, I felt sure of being saved. But when I fell back into the hole, I thought it was over. The girls about me were grabbing onto me. Everyone grabbed at each other, and when we did get a hold on the wall, it was only for a second. I caught hold several times, but when I was pulled at by the others, my hand slipped. There was only a few taken out when I felt something under my feet. It must have been some little girl that had drowned. All the time I prayed. I said my prayers over and over. I could not see after a while, and as I was praying to the Lord to save me, I found the rake in my hands. When I came into the light, I saw Principal Zimmerman. I crawled up and was lifted out. After struggling in the violent frenzy among the pit of disgusting fecal matter, 14-year-old Edna Gerke again found a purchase among the brickwork and made one final attempt to pull herself out. Far above me, it seemed somebody was coming down a ladder and called to me. Suddenly, someone took hold of me. I looked back over my shoulder and saw the agonized faces of my friends, then lost consciousness and knew no more until I woke up in the schoolroom, surrounded by the bodies of my friends. Gerke's arms were horribly bruised and torn up by deep scratches. Wounds she said were down to the clawing attempts of her classmates to climb over her out of the stinking mess of filth. The rainstorm ceased not long after, but the break in the weather did little to relieve the chaos that was unfolding on the schoolyard. A fair few of the girls passed out not long after emerging from the sewage, adding the fear that they had succumbed to the terrible fumes of the cesspit they had fallen into. But thankfully, neighbors of the school offered up their homes as treatment centers, with rescuers carrying girls to the safety of houses where they were revived, cleaned up, and comforted after such a harrowing ordeal. After Zimmerman helped the 19th and final girl off the ladder and watched other rescuers carry her away into the schoolhouse for treatment, he leaned inside the shattered outhouse and peered into the dark, silent cesspit. All he could see were broken pieces of outhouse floor floating around in the surface of the foul water. As he realized the task was over and the adrenaline began to fade, he could have easily fallen into the cesspit himself if it wasn't for other rescuers coming to check on him. But then it was early afternoon, and the sun had finally broken through the clouds, shedding an oddly warm light on such a horrific scene of chaos, filth, and death. The gathered mass of onlookers and rescuers doubled as relatives began streaming in from downtown Cincinnati. It had taken only an hour or so for word-of-mouth accounts of the fatal collapse to reach the wider citizenry. When they heard the news, Pleasant Ridge residents who happened to be working downtown ran back to the village, where they were met with the sight of the frantic children and mothers of the victims, who were congregated in the front of the school. Many of the girls were vomiting blood, and a local doctor in attendance was not sure if they would survive the afternoon. Frantic confusion continued for several more hours as more and more people arrived from nearby villages. Although most of the girls who crammed into the privy lived in Pleasant Ridge, the routes between the school and the train stations were crammed with people. The village telephone system proved inadequate to keep up with the demand, and hundreds of people crowded around every available phone, waiting to find if their daughter was among those affected. When the adrenaline rush of the rescue abated, Principal Zimmerman and his teachers sobbed along with the parents who lost their daughters. Local medical staff looked at the exhausted and emotionally distraught principal and ordered him to a house across the street to rest. One of the doctors remained there the remainder of the afternoon, suffering from a severe headache brought on by the tension and the hours he spent inhaling the noxious fumes emitted from the caked bodies of the drowned girls. On the Sunday morning of the drowned girls' funeral, every church bell in Pleasant Ridge rang continuously from 9 a.m. when the first funeral started until 4 p.m. when the last of the 4 girls buried that day were put to rest. 4 school friends of Emma Steinkamp, the first victim to be buried, had been tapped to be her pallbearers. The girls were bearing flowers dressed in white as they walked alongside, but after carrying the tiny casket to the front of the German Evangelical Church, they were too grief-stricken to carry on any further, so 4 local boys took over instead. The reverend of the Methodist Church tried to calm the sobbing crowd, but one grandmother fell weeping against the small casket, and Emma's mother fainted with a deafening shriek. At that point, 2 of the girls in white became hysterical and their parents carried them from the scene. The entire town and a fair portion of the rest of Cincinnati followed the hearse to the cemetery. It had been the most horrifying, revolting tragedy in the entirety of Cincinnati's recent history, one that the townsfolk would never forget. And the deaths were made all the more terrible by the fact that they had occurred in a pit of human sewage, a fate that no single person could ever deserve, let alone an innocent young girl.
This happened last year during my student exchange in France and was probably only 2 weeks before COVID imploded. I had to head back to my home country, and that night there was a language exchange at a bar, maybe 30 minutes away from me on the subway. My roommate didn't seem interested in going, so I decided to make this my first night out alone, so I'd already talked to the organizers of the event and they seemed really nice. Plus, the subway in Paris on Fridays closes at around 1:30 a.m., so I knew I had time to go meet people and get home relatively safely. I got there maybe half an hour late, got my little flag stickers that indicated the languages I spoke, and headed into the crowd to try and talk to people. Everything was pleasant. I made friends with the group of guys, and we made good small talk for a solid hour. After a while, the group decided to split and trying to find others to actually exchange languages with since we were all speaking English. At this point, I headed over to the bar to get myself a drink. We're a group of what I can only describe as chaps, but French started annoying me about the flag on my shirt, a Chilean flag. They threw everything out there. Is it in Africa or is it Colombia? At first, I didn't mind correcting them, but it got old pretty quick. After I realized they were just messing around, I left them to it and started talking to an older man by the bar. You seem nice enough. After talking to him for about 30 minutes, he headed off. And that's when the creepy encounter started. A random guy in his mid-20s, early 30s showed up next to me at the bar and started making conversation by saying, "Oh, I immediately know your flag was from." I just smiled at him. Then he started the, "Oh, you're very beautiful" talk. Look, as a 21-year-old woman, this isn't my first time in this situation. Usually if men aren't being overtly creepy, I'll just smile. Maybe give conversation a try. But if they keep pushing, I just go. I said thanks and kept nursing my drink, hoping he caught the sign that I wasn't trying to talk. He kept asking me about where I was from, why I was here, where I was staying. To which I gave him vague short answers when out of nowhere, and I really mean out of absolutely nowhere, he'd said something along the lines of, "I'm in love with you." Dude, what? I've directed maybe 20 words in total to this man, and I'm getting a full love confession? I let out a laugh. That was half nerves laugh. Are you kidding me? And at this point, he's forcing eye contact, really intense eye contact. I tried everything. I'm not interested. I'm in a relationship. I even headed towards my last resort, which was saying that I was a lesbian, which is true. But he would not budge. He said, "I respect that. It's not your fault." What, that I'm lesbian? And he kept on going with what I considered to be the creepiest part. "I want to do romantic things with you," he said. Excuse me, you what? This set me off, and that negative gut feeling is one of those phrases that is just off enough that your brain goes, not dinner, not a date, not something just romantic. Well, I wasn't about to find out what it meant. I put on my full bitch face that said, "Look, I know you're just trying to be nice, but I'm not interested, and I am in a committed relationship." I got up and he tried to touch my arm, to which I immediately flinched and shocked daggers at him. "I just think you're beautiful. I want to marry you someday. Maybe you have kids. You have beautiful eyes." Thankfully, the bar had cleared out some, and I was able to cross the floor and grab my Parker. He kept saying things behind me like, "I just want to try romantic things." I then grabbed a random non-creepy man that I had talked to that night who was just leaving and said, "Hey, are you walking to the subway?" And I went with him. My recently professed suitor followed us. I remember him perfectly wearing a tan waterproof jacket, standing right outside the bar door looking at me. The guy I was walking with was going in the company in opposite direction of the subway line, but I wasn't about to risk going down to my own line alone and waiting. It was past midnight, so trains took slightly longer to arrive. Most train stations have an option to switch directions if you mess up without paying again. So I figured I'd go down with my bodyguard of sorts, make him stand with me near the direction change, and if I saw the creep coming, I'd book it and pray a car came in time. We had an app that showed estimated arrival times. It was just my luck that that specific station was undergoing repairs, and it was either get your direction right on the first try, or perish. No direction change in sight. So I did what in my 2 mojito fight or flight mode had to do. I ran back up the stairs and tried to pay again. Except the card I used was one of those cards that once you scan, you can't use again within 5 minutes. I wasn't going to wait that long, and I could hear someone coming down the subway stairs. Paris subway had turnstiles, but it also had doors that only open once you scan. So I sucked in my breath as much as I could, went under the turnstile, and squeezed through my tiny space between the door. I have no idea how I made it past with my Parker on adrenaline is one hell of a drug. I had just managed to make it downstairs when the train was arriving. But as I turned around, I saw him on the sort of bridge area overlooking the train tracks. I managed to grow out my biggest, meanest no, and then said something like, "I want to grow old with you. Give me your number." The train doors opened, and I walked inside backwards, making eye contact with him, saying no again. Luckily, that's just about one of the most universal words out there. I'm thankful to the Friday night 1 a.m. Paris subway crowd. They all seemed confused, but they had the right spirit. A couple of girls waved over so I could stand with them until the door closed, and they went with me until I had to change lines. I felt safer on the 2-minute walk from the subway to my apartment than near that guy in my neighborhood was kind of known for being a big crack hotspot. At least the crackheads left me alone. So if anyone takes something away from this, just be mean, be rude as hell, I tried being mean a little too late and got one of the creepiest love confessions of my life. A stalker and into the subway, and a story to tell on here. I'm a French student doing a master's in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I live alone in apartments in a building where there are only students. I'm 22, enjoying life peacefully. To give you a bit of context, I live in a calm, good neighborhood. The only noises I had here are the tram or parties in the building since a lot of students are there. One night around 10 p.m., I hear a knock on my door. I live on the 3rd floor, and to get to my front door, you have to open the main door, which needs a key. Then you need to open the door to my corridor with the same key. So people who want to come to my door must have the key, call me, or ring at the door so I could open the door for them from my apartment. Nothing of this happened. I just hear a knock at my door. I usually open the door without a second thought, whether it's my landlord or a neighbor asking for something. As he told you, I feel pretty safe in the building, and I could also take care and defend myself in case anything happens. But this time, for some reason, I had a bad feeling about this. I didn't move at first. I thought the person would just leave. I finished my assignments. However, the knocking continued for 30 seconds. I said, "Yeah," in English. The person knocking doesn't say anything. I say in English again, "Who is it?" The voice answers in English. It's Uber Eats, which is weird because Dutch always speak in Dutch, and I recognize the voices and accents of everyone on my floor who have the key to access the floor. So it wasn't a neighbor, it wasn't my landlord, it was someone claiming to come from Uber Eats. But the issue is, I didn't order anything from Uber Eats that day. The voice was unfamiliar. In case it's a prank or a neighbor pulling a joke, it was also a deep voice, at least 40, and probably a smoker. I replied that I didn't order anything, you must have it wrong. After a few seconds, the knocking continues and the same voice says, "Pretty sure you did have an order under your name." I start panicking. I look around and pick up a knife in case he breaks the door because the knocking was getting a bit louder. I checked if my door was locked. It wasn't. I was literally 10 centimeters away from him. My front door was the only thing keeping him from me, and I'm glad it doesn't open from the outside. He needed a key to open it even if it's not locked. I stepped again and asked, "What's the name?" He seems to be thinking for a few seconds when a final knock occurs. It was loud and it translated some anger, frustration. Finally, I hear him going down the emergency stairs right next to my apartment. The steps were heavy and the person was clearly in a hurry. I don't know what he wanted or what would have happened to me if I'd opened the door as I usually do. I still haven't understood how he got through the 2 doors. And why did he come specifically to the last apartment on the 3rd floor? Did he try others before I posted the post about it on the WhatsApp group we have in the building? No one saw anything suspicious, so no one opened the door for anyone. Either way, I'm lucky for my instinct telling me not to open the door, and I'm glad I listened.
So, back when I was a kid, me and my best bud were having a sleepover. His mom and dad had gotten a divorce a couple months prior, so to counter all the stress of it, he pretty much got whatever he wanted. Not like his mom was spoiling him or anything, she was just being super nice to make sure he wasn't too bummed about his dad leaving. Did it work? Yes and no. Getting to have his friends sleep over, getting an Xbox, a cell phone, and getting much more personal freedom was all well and good, but every so often you could tell the whole thing was getting to him. Good thing was, I got to spend a whole bunch more time with him to give him the support we needed, which coincidentally meant that I was there for one of the worst moments of his childhood. Actually, make that both our childhoods. So, we're having a sleepover, and his mom is having a friend over. We're upstairs, they're downstairs. At one point, I wanted a glass of water, so I head downstairs, but he had to walk through the TV room to get to the kitchen, and when I do, I see my buddy's mom's friend is a dude, and they're getting kinda close, if you know what I'm saying. They jump off each other when I walk into the room. I walk through like, don't mind me, and it's incredibly awkward as I walk back through with my glass of water. Then, I make the mistake of mentioning it to my buddy. He's clearly not happy with the fact that it's a dude. Like, we're 9th graders at this point, so we're pretty savvy to, you know. Anyway, my buddy isn't happy, but he just does his usual thing of internalizing it before distracting himself. Not the best coping mechanism in hindsight, but it is what it is. Then, remember that cell phone I mentioned? Well, his mom bought it for him so he could keep in touch with his dad, which he then does. And guess what's the first thing he tells him? Yep, that there's a strange dude over at his house. I totally blame myself in the moment. It sucked so hard, and when my buddy hung up, turned to me with a smug grin and said, "Dad's on his way over." I just knew something bad was going to happen. I kinda wanted to leave, but at the same time, my whole reason for being at that time was being a good friend to Ryan. I had a really healthy family life at home. Like, my mom and dad were a loving, dedicated couple, right up until the day my dad passed. And I'd like to think they raised good kids. But Ryan, his parents were total morons, and good God, did that make me feel guilty. So, I stuck around. I knew something horrible was going to happen, but I had zero freaking clue to how bad it would really be. My buddy's bedroom window overlooked his driveway, so when his dad finally did show up, we could see and hear almost everything that went on down there. His dad, and I'm not embellishing here, hurtles up the driveway at like 40 miles an hour, screeches to a stop, and then doesn't even shut his door when he climbed out of his car. Ryan is watching him, looking at him like his dad is a knight in shining armor for a few seconds, right up until he says, "Oh crap, I think my dad has a gun." Hearing that final word sent this razor-sharp icicle running right through my guts. I knew there'd probably be shouting and fighting, but shooting? Then all we hear through an open window is, "Where is he?" It was Ryan's dad. He'd banged on the door until his mom answered, and then demanded to know where her guy friend was. Ryan's mom's all like, "I don't know what you're talking about." But then Ryan's dad goes from 0 to 100 in a second flat. "Don't lie to me, Linda, where is he?" he says. There's this very real, palpable pause, and me and Ryan are just on this very tense, nervous feeling. Then his mom says, "Who told you?" Again, shiver of ice through my stomach, because I'm basically the one who told, and in that moment, I told myself that whatever was about to happen was completely my fault. "See?" Ryan's dad exploded at the admission. "You're a freaking liar, Linda. Now get out of my way." We could hear Ryan's mom screaming for a second. Then we heard another voice, only this one is definitely inside the house. The guy friend. "Get off!" he screamed. You heard the guy start to shout something at Ryan's dad. Then he just went totally silent, and all you could hear were feet beating against the floorboards downstairs. All before, bam, bam, bam. 3 distinct gunshots that echoed around the house. Me and Ryan are just bawling at this point, because we could still hear his mom screaming, and we had no idea if she'd been shot, if the boyfriend was dead, if the boyfriend had a gun and fired at Ryan's dad. The whole situation was traumatic enough, but the not knowing, man, that was just the worst. I had to grab Ryan's cell phone off of him to call 911. He just totally shut down from the stress. He'd had a rough enough few months while the whole divorce thing went on, then now he had to deal with potentially a dead mom or dad. I don't blame him, honestly. It was bad enough for me, and it wasn't even any of my parents. The 3 shots were all heard, and before the cops showed up, the only sounds we could hear were Ryan's mom crying downstairs. We should have gone to check on her. I know we should have, but the dispatcher told us both to stay put because we didn't know if there was still an active shooter or whatever, so we did as we were told. Thankfully, everyone turned out to be okay and no one was even shot. Ryan's dad had aimed the gun at his mom's friend as soon as he'd laid eyes on him, but the guy was quick and just bolted out the back of the house as Ryan's dad pursued. He fired 3 shots, but it was basically just to scare the guy away at that point, and I heard none of the bullets even went near him. But still, it was terrifying, and Ryan's dad ended up going back to prison for a long while because of it.
This happened less than a month ago. I'm a petite female in my 20s. I'm currently living in Mexico to escape life, a little after post-grad in a city that is not known as a dangerous place. A lot of foreigners live here, and I haven't heard any safety concerns. I'm living with my cousin who works from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m., but houses are in a pretty good area with a school, nice hotel, and Starbucks within walking distance. Just to give you an idea of how unexpected this was, the incident happened while my aunt was visiting us from Mexico City. She stayed home all day with me, while I usually studied or watched Netflix. On this day, I was planning to have a chill day since I had woken up at around 11:30 a.m. I was watching something on my computer when I started to hear some loud pounding, like someone was working on something with a hammer. This was around midday. I thought my aunt had let some repairman in to do some work. I was under the assumption my aunt was still in the house, so I wasn't too worried and continued to watch my show. The hard noise stopped, and I heard 2 male voices talking casually. This made me feel more confident that they were there to fix something. I get up from bed to fetch my phone, and I don't have any service plan down here to message my aunt on Facebook to see what's going on. I didn't get a reply from her, so I just took it as she was busy and go back to lying in bed to not thinking of anything of the noise. 5 minutes later, I hear footsteps coming up the door. Take in mind, I'm lying in bed with my back to the door. When the door opens, I see a man. He was a pretty normal-looking guy with facial hair and dressed rather cleanly. Like if you saw him in public, you wouldn't think anything negative about him. As soon as he saw me, he shut the door and went downstairs. Then I heard another huge noise that I led to realize was him slamming the front door shut. My room is first room above the stairs, so the first thought was that this repairman accidentally opened my door. I thought he was trying to get access to our patio. I was a little confused, but again, didn't think anything of the situation. I slowly walk downstairs calling my aunt's name, but I get no response. As soon as I make it down the stairs, I hear my aunt in a panicked voice saying that they robbed us. They took the TV. She forgot to lock the first iron door of the house, which made it easy for them to break into the second door. She said that when she was walking by from the store, she noticed someone by the house. She asked him what he wanted, and he said he was looking for a teacher, and he got into a car with the other man and left. She didn't notice the TV in their car or anything suspicious until she got to the house. She mentioned that someone had rang the doorbell before she left to go to the store. When she went to check, no one was there. She believed they'd been watching her and my cousin, so when they opened the bedroom door, they were caught off guard and dipped. It's really frightening to think what could have happened if they didn't get scared off by seeing me. The cops came and were then telling me that they often kidnap girls or rape them. I know I got lucky.
Domino's was the first place that I got to work in after getting laid off from my first job. It was one of the easiest places that I worked in, and I found it very easy for me. Now, it wasn't the very high-end job that I had before, but this time, working at Domino's was good for my mental health, and this was something that I really wanted. I was done with the high-end race and competitiveness, and I just wanted to take a break from all of that and just focus on some emotional growth. And this place seemed to be a fit, just right good. And so I stayed at this Domino's working the shifts because I did not want to break free from this relaxing work. It might have been tiring physically, but mentally everything was good. I was getting paid good enough, and being a cashier, I had much more privileges than the guys in the kitchen. And since we had 4 people working the shifts, the thing was pretty flexible, and I was able to do whatever I want in the free time. And I decided to take up jiu-jitsu lessons. It was something that I always wanted to do, so I decided to take jiu-jitsu and work my way up to a black belt in it. I would do my hours at the Domino's, and then straight away leave for jiu-jitsu. It was pretty great to be able to work up a normal job and then leave to do something that I really loved. It kept my body and my mind both in check. Around a month into the job, I was working night shift. It was the night before Christmas, and I was working the shift for my friend since I didn't really have any plans for the Christmas. Our place opened at 7, so I was there early, waiting for everyone else to come in. And then when they came in, I saw that we were already very short-staffed. We were not planning on opening for the night, but since it was a Domino's and not a family business, we didn't really have any say in the matter. So we started making pizzas, and since it was the only decent pizza place in the city, we were getting the Christmas Eve rush, and people started coming in. And not just that, we were also getting the online deliveries racked upon one another. We only had one delivery guy, and it was getting hectic with people coming in and calling in. It was very busy, and the kitchen and the work environment in the kitchen was getting heated too. And because of the orders coming in, it was getting very problematic to keep the track of order. And even the people sitting in the place were getting impatient with their orders, while some were leaving. Some were just constantly shouting at us to hurry up, and I was busy apologizing for the delay. I forget to keep an eye in the kitchen, and things were getting way out of hand there. The kitchen staff was busy fighting each other because it was a chaos in there, and people outside weren't really helping. And then one of our workers snapped, and he burnt his hand and shouted, "Fuck!" which scared a lot of people. But there was this one dude. He was the customer, and he just wouldn't stop shouting at us and the staff, and was getting on the nerves of everyone in there. While everyone else was busy attending to the worker to dilute the situation, I just passed on the fresh garlic bread batch free of cost to everyone in the room. And when I gave that man the bread, he threw it from my hand and said, "I want my order, not this second-hand donation, asshole. Bring me my order." And I said very calmly, "It will be out, sir. Things are very busy and we are a bit short-staffed." And he replied, "Not my fucking problem." And I said, "I will be back with your order," and went away. I saw that he started harassing one of our injured staff members, saying mean things to me and using racial slurs at him from a distance. I said, "Sir, please stop harassing our employee." But he wouldn't buzz, and suddenly he started being physical with him and started slapping him on his head, pushing him to do his job. And when the employee retaliated, he took the gun out and raised it and said, "You don't have nothing to say, motherfucker, do you?" And that was the breaking point for me. I jumped over the counter, looked at the man, and I quickly approached him and he pointed the gun at me. Before he could, I used an Americana, one of the jiu-jitsu moves on him, and brought him down, disarming him. And then one of the people in the Domino's called the police and the man was apprehended. He had the courage to point the firearm in a public place and endanger so many lives around him. If I was not the one to act, I wonder what irrational decision he would have made. I'm just glad that I knew enough martial art to put him down. But then again, a gun most of the time, it won't really work. So keep your distance with sociopath like that. That night was long, but thankfully it ended without harming anyone. Well, anyone but one of our employees who got his hand burnt. But in the end, everyone was back at their house for Christmas in time. Though I definitely had something else in store for me. After closing the Domino's and on my way home, a car stopped in and a bunch of guys stepped out and beat the shit out of me. And one of them was the same guy from the altercation, the guy I took down. Turns out he had the pull in the police force and was let go with mere warning. They beat the light out of me, and I remember the last thing he said. "Not so tough now, huh, pizza boy?" From that day and today, I wished I crossed roads with him again. I bet he wouldn't want to cross me right now that I have the black belt.
In 1979, Irish new wave band the Boomtown Rats released a song called I Don't Like Mondays. Penned by Bob Geldof, a man perhaps more famous for his charitable musical events, the chorus consists of just 2 lines, I don't like Mondays, and I want to shoot the whole day down. So on first listen you might be forgiven for thinking the song is nothing more than an innocent Garfield-esque skewering of the worst day of the week. But let's take a look at the song's opening few lines. The silicon chip inside her head gets switched to overload, and nobody's gonna go to school today. She's gonna make them stay at home. Starting to sound a little ominous, right? Who is this person whose brain has gone into overload, and how is she going to stop people from attending school? The answer to the many menacing questions provoked by an Irish art punk song actually lie thousands of miles away in San Diego, California, where a young girl named Brenda Spencer lived. In early 1979, Brenda was just 16 years old and was living in the San Carlos neighborhood of San Diego. She was around 5'2", with bright red hair, and was living with her single-parent father, Wallace. But life in the family home was far from pleasant, and Wallace was an extremely heavy drinker. As a result, holding onto a job was hard, and poverty meant that both father and daughter were forced to sleep on a single mattress on the living room floor, surrounded by the detritus of Wallace's addiction. Neighbors said the couple weren't particularly friendly, but neither were they particularly hostile. The only time they'd ever seen any trouble over the Spencer's place was when a police officer knocked on the door to make a harmless inquiry. Wallace had just about exploded on the stunned police officer, demanding to see a warrant, then expelling him from his property when he couldn't produce one. When a neighbor gently challenged Wallace on his behavior, he doubled down, saying the cop was lucky that he hadn't shot him off the porch with his sawed-off shotgun. In school, Brenda showed obvious signs of intelligence, in particular a talent for photography. But her general disinterest in the rigor and routine of formal education soon led to chronic absence, and in the end, she was transferred to a specialist school for problem students. It was basically a remedial school, and Brenda says she remembers how depressing it was to be treated like she was stupid, rather than someone who simply didn't like going to school. However, it was at this new school that experts realized that Brenda's issues might be deeper than mere behavioral problems, and a brain scan showed that she had an acute injury to the temporal lobe of her brain. This was blamed on a bicycle accident during her childhood, with Wallace remembering that he'd made an interesting observation following the incident. He figured the whole thing might put her off riding her bike, but the polar opposite occurred. Brenda seemed unafraid, more impulsive even, willing to take risks, riding faster, jumping higher. The summer following her first year at the specialist school was a nightmare for Brenda's father. She seemed to have inherited her father's obsessive distrust of authority, as well as his interest in firearms, and it was clear to all around her that Brenda had stored up a huge amount of malice and contempt whilst interred at the specialist school. Negative energy she'd then brought right back home with her. She began to hunt birds around the neighborhood, viciously executing any and all she could see, until one day she came home in a cop car with the officer telling Wallace that Brenda had been caught shooting out the windows of Grover Elementary School, which was just across the street. She managed to get off with just a slap on the wrist, but the psychiatrist at her specialist school recommended she be admitted to a mental hospital on the ground that she was a danger to herself and others. However, Wallace vehemently objected, citing the poor reaction she was already having with the new school. The holidays followed shortly after, with Brenda asking her father for a wireless radio set for her bedroom. But instead of a radio, Wallace opted for a shockingly irresponsible gift in its place. Instead of taking her BB gun away, he gave her an upgrade in the form of a Ruger 10/22 semi-automatic rifle with a telescopic sight and 500 rounds of ammunition. Brenda was now a ticking time bomb, armed and dangerous, and it wasn't long before she'd fatally explode. On the morning of January 29, 1979, the children of Grover Cleveland Elementary School began to line up outside the gates, waiting for 59-year-old Principal Burton Ragg to open the gates up. It was a Monday, one of the first of the year, and despite the unusually chilly temperatures, it remained a peaceful, picturesque California morning. Yet just moments later, that same peace was to be abruptly shattered by the bark of a Ruger 1022. Because Brenda Spencer had awoken that morning in a particularly foul mood, one that seems to have been exacerbated by the sight of those innocent young school children lining up for one of the first school days of the new year. Perhaps it was a longing to return to that same normality, a sadness that boiled up in contempt as she watched those children engage in something she might never again experience. But in the end, she would give a far different reason as to why she grabbed a rifle that morning, all before setting up in a second-floor window of her childhood home, aiming and opening fire. With the first crack of the rifle, the first child fell. Mr. Ragg, the school principal, spun around in terrified confusion, trying to figure out what was going on. Then another crack was heard, and yet another child fell. Mr. Ragg tried desperately to get the children behind some kind of hard cover, but it was no good. They were hurtling around in a horrified panic, gifting Brenda one perfect kill shot after another. Ragg managed to get a number of the children to safety, but dozens were still running around the street outside, screaming and crying. As he ran out to try to get the remainder to safety, Brenda Spencer saw him, and she understood what he was trying to do. In a split second, she aimed, fired, and Mr. Ragg fell dead in the street. It was then 56-year-old school custodian Mike Suker's turn to try to rescue the children. But as he too ran into the street and attempted to drag one of the wounded children to safety, Brenda once again took aim and executed the selfless, courageous man where he stood. Not even the police were safe from Brenda's marksmanship, and the first responding officer was shot in the neck as he exited his patrol car. Although mortally wounded, he was able to relay the shooter's position to his fellow officers, and soon, Brenda's line of sight was blocked off by a garbage truck that police drove in front of her house. What followed was a tense standoff between the San Diego Police Department and a 16-year-old girl. Police negotiators managed to establish communication with her, but after hours, they heard nothing but how Brenda wanted to come out shooting, and how the children she had killed were easy targets, and that she only wished she'd killed more of them. Meanwhile, a newspaper reporter from the local San Diego Union Tribune had been calling random numbers in the neighborhood, hoping to talk to anyone who had been witness to the slaughter. And by complete chance, one of the numbers he called was none other than the Spencer residence. Apparently, Brenda answered the phone believing it was the negotiators calling again, and unleashed a torrent of curse words as she picked up the phone. There was a chilling moment for the reporter as he realized exactly who he was talking to, and said his blood ran cold when the girl confirmed that it was her who had been doing the shooting that morning. The reporter, after asking a few preliminary questions to confirm who she was, then asked her why she had chosen to take the lives of all those innocent children. The words of Brenda Spencer's answer to that question would pass into legend. "Because I don't like Mondays," she said. This livened up the day. In the end, Brenda didn't come out shooting as she promised she would. Eventually, she got hungry and reportedly surrendered once the authorities promised that they would take her to Burger King. Officers found empty beer and whiskey bottles all over the house, but reported that Brenda was not intoxicated at the time of the killings. The following year, just a day after her 18th birthday, Brenda was sentenced to 25 years to life at the California Institution for Women in Chino. At a parole hearing in the year of 2005, the deputy district attorney cited ongoing incidents of self-harm as showing that she was psychotic and unfit to be released. This self-harm came in the form of scratching the words alone and unforgiven into her own flesh, and it meant it would be another 10 years before she would face another parole board. As of June of 2021, Brenda remains incarcerated at the CIW in Chino and is set for another parole hearing in September. This means that by this time next year, Brenda Spencer might once again be free to walk the streets of San Diego. And if that is the case, it might be a good idea to be extra polite to any middle-aged redheads you might meet on a Monday morning. Because as much as no one likes Mondays, some evidently dislike them a great deal more than others.
This is a story about a 40-ish-year-old man who cyber-stalked and physically stalked a young 18-year-old girl he'd met at church. Further investigation by the girl and her family showed that he had a history of going to different churches and targeting minors, using God as a reason as to why they belonged together. They were unable to get a restraining order because legally there were no grounds for one, since he hadn't threatened the girl or tried to physically harm her. Many of the fellow churchgoers accused the girl of dressing provocatively, ultimately leading him on, and was just trying to scam money from the church in a lawsuit, all of which is completely false. Now, the first thing you should know is that I was blessed or cursed, depending on how you look at it, with young-looking genes. Everyone always thinks I'm younger than what I am, and this bizarre event happened a few months after I'd turned 18. Bear in mind that I looked like I was 16. I lived in a large, very diverse city. I'm Latina. It matters later on. And I grew up going to a church that belonged to a larger organization. I'd been going to this church since I was born, so I knew most of the congregation. There were very few people that I didn't know. But there was one man, let's call him Nate, that always made me feel really uneasy and sick. Now, the church has a routine of creating a line after service, so we could all greet each other. I hated this part of the church visit, and having to greet him, and I told my mum how I had a bad feeling about him, but she said it was all in my head. Fast forward to a few months later, when I was sitting in the dining area with my friend's boyfriend. We were just chatting and joking around, waiting for my friend, and Nate was sitting about 2 tables away from us. There was no one else, just us 3, and he was just sitting there staring at us. I briefly mentioned to my friend's boyfriend about how Nate always made me feel uneasy. I was getting really irritated now too, because I could feel him staring right at me. So I went to the restroom. When I came back, Nate was sitting across from my friend's boyfriend and was talking to him. It was a little odd, but as I approached, so did a group of our friends. Now there was about 8 of us, ranging from the ages of 16 to 22. We all grew up together and met in youth group, and we were all sitting with a man in his late 40s. He sat in complete silence and was just staring at me every now and then. Then about 5 minutes later, my friend's boyfriend said, "We have a youth meeting that we need to get to." So we all got up and left Nate sitting alone. When we got to the meeting place, which was in another part of the building, my friend's boyfriend pulled her and myself apart and said, "Maybe I'm biased because of what you told me, but when you left to use the restroom, he came over and started asking about you. He even asked if I was your boyfriend. He looked a little mad, but seemed to lighten up when I said I wasn't." The crazy part is that at that moment my friend told us that when Nate had first started coming to our church, he'd messaged her on Facebook and kept sending her messages, telling her he was lonely and just wanted to be friends, which is coincidentally when she started dating her boyfriend. So she changed her relationship status and the messages stopped. At the time, I was taking a social media hiatus because my ex hadn't handled our breakup well and was harassing me on social media. After my friend had told me about the messages that Nate had sent her, I decided to log into my Facebook. And lo and behold, there were hundreds from him to me. He actually didn't use his real name on his account, which should have been a red flag. The messages would start nice enough, about just being friends, but would then get verbally aggressive because I was ignoring him or because he'd seen me talking to my guy friends at church. I made the mistake of just blocking him and deleting the message thread. Big mistake. Always keep the evidence. I brought it up to my parents, and they again just blew me off. Said it was just a culture thing because Nate was from El Salvador. And apparently it's common to be overly affectionate with strangers in most Latin American countries. However, a few weeks later, my parents did a 180. When Nate first started coming to church, he sat all the way in the front row, and me being a teenager sat all the way in the back with my friends. But slowly over the last few months, Nate would start sitting one bench further back, until finally he was sitting on the same bench as my friends and I. I don't know about you, but in my church women have to wear skirts and dresses during service. When we go to church Saturdays, there's a morning and afternoon service, and in between they have mini services and workshops for different age groups and genders. Well, this particular Saturday, I wore a knee-length dress and had a couple of friends sit between Nate and I. I was just whispering with my friends during the afternoon service, and normally when it ends, everyone kind of hangs out to socialize. And during this time period, my dad, who worked the night shift at a hospital, would have to leave before the afternoon service ended. But my mum would still like to socialize afterwards. But this Saturday, my mum basically herded our family to the car ASAP. My friend, who had received the messages too, was actually sleeping over that night, and my dad had asked us to buy a couple of pizzas and meet him in the cafeteria of the hospital, which wasn't too far from church, and it was empty because we got there at 8:30. So we all ate together, talked and joked around, until my dad asked my grandmother to take my younger brothers outside to play with the giant chessboard, which was just outside the cafeteria. Once they'd left, my dad apologized to me for never believing me about Nate. I was completely surprised, because I had no idea what he was talking about. He went on to tell me that my mum happened to look back, because my parents sat in the bench in front of us, and saw the way that Nate had been looking at me in a hungry way during the morning service. She asked my dad to speak to him during break time, and my dad has never wanted to go into much detail about what was said, except to tell me the following. My wife and I have some concern over your interest in our daughter. Let me stop you there, Nate said. Your daughter and I are in a beautiful commuted relationship, and it's God's will for us to be together. You shouldn't try to stop God's will. My dad, in shock, replied, What is wrong with you? She's still just a kid. If you were really looking for an actual relationship, you would be pursuing one of the older single women in this church. You're sick. Hearing my dad confirm what I'd suspected all along, and validating my gut feeling, made me break down in tears. The whole situation frightened me, because I knew he wasn't just trying to sit on my bench. He was working his way to me, to sit next to me, to talk to me, and worse, to touch me. My dad proceeded to tell me that he'd spoken with the group of pastors at our church about what Nate had been doing, and he said that one of the pastors yelled out, Are we seriously going to let him do this again? It turned out that I hadn't been the first. My friend wasn't the first. There had been someone else. I didn't know who, but I was set on finding out more. I called around and let people know from the other churches in our organization to keep an eye out in case he had tried to have inappropriate social media or in-person encounters with any other minors. My investigating paid off. I found 3 other girls who were 13, 15 and 16, and they were all from different churches, and one was from mine. They all told the same story, about how he tried social media contact and eventually tried in person. The 13-year-old has an older sister, who handled him, and a few weeks later he moved on to another church. The 16-year-old went to a church that was pretty much made up of literally her entire extended family. Almost everyone was related. And apparently a couple of her older cousins caught him doing or saying something incredibly inappropriate to her, at church of all places, and it's unclear if they'd threatened violence or actually just beaten him up. I do know that the police were involved though. but only because of the cousin's involvement, not what was happening with the minor. Now this brings me back to the 15-year-old girl that went to church with me. He'd done his whole routine with her, but it got to the point that he'd actually gotten her number and was texting and calling her at all hours. Her brother stepped in and asked him to stop, and apologized if his sister had led him on. WTF? He genuinely blamed his sister for what happened. I remember being filled with so much rage over that. It turned out that Nate was being prepared to be a pastor at my church, and even though my dad had complained about his behavior, they were still going to go ahead with it. I told my dad after I'd stopped crying that I wanted to talk to a lawyer. Well, my dad had a friend that was an immigration lawyer, and she offered to help connect us with someone that could help. The lawyer said that because he'd never actually threatened me or tried to physically hurt me, I didn't have any grounds for a restraining order. I don't know if that's in all states or just in Texas. My dad informed the pastors prior to our meeting with the lawyer that we were seeking legal counsel to see what my options were for dealing with Nate, which thus unfortunately led to the spread of false corrupted information, because by the next Saturday, everyone, who wasn't directly from my family, believed that I was trying to sue the church, and these were mostly people that I'd known my whole life, people that I loved. They called me a gold digger, said it was my fault for dressing provocatively, and that I probably led him on. Keep in mind that I didn't wear V-necks, made sure my dresses were at least knee-length, and if my shoulders were exposed, I wore a cardigan, unless it was very hot out. It broke my heart, especially because one of my favourite uncles, the only one that also goes to church, actually sided with them. To this day, I only politely greet him, and I don't hate him, but my love for him is gone. This decision for him to not have my back affected his relationship with everyone in our family, including his own kids. I took a few weeks off and stopped going to church, and Nate stopped showing up at church too. He stopped trying to message me from his fake accounts and just disappeared. Things actually got so hostile that the president of the church organization administration had to step in and hold a hearing for everyone's complaints. It was decided that it would be best if my dad stopped attending church, because he was a troublemaker, even though all he was doing was standing up for me, asking for respect and accountability. It was announced a week later that my dad would no longer be welcomed at that church. My dad took a few moments to say goodbye in front of everyone, and said that we talked as a family, and none of us would be coming back. He said he was choosing to leave, remembering all the good time and the life lessons he'd learnt in his 20 years of attending that church. He asked them to learn from their mistakes and be better. Everyone started crying, including all the people that called us gold diggers and called me a slut to my face. I remember this one older lady that was BFFs with my grandma, who said that she and her husband really loved me, but I had stopped loving them, and that's why our relationship was so strained. No, lady, it's the fact that you call me a slut even though you were one of the people that used to change my diaper. I still get so angry when I think about everything that happened and how it all escalated. I also get mad at myself and the system, because I know Nate is still out there. And even though he'd lost interest in me, it doesn't change the fact that he will always be targeting underage girls. Sometimes I can't help but worry, because I know